dignitaries, including President Biden, who delivered the eulogy address. Well attended. The president-elect Donald Trump and First Lady-to-be were also there, as well as all living presidents in attendance. Former President Obama sitting right next to the president-elect. It really was remarkable to see that many prominent people all in one room, just underscoring the magnitude of this moment and when a former president dies, but especially someone like President Carter.
Yeah, this after 36 hours of what was a very poignant lying in state of the former president of the United States, the U.S. Capitol building. There you see members of the armed forces to greet the remains of former president and the late now President Jimmy Carter. It was a bipartisan ceremony there at the Capitol building. Members of both the House and the Senate, Vice President Kamala Harris, her husband Doug Emhoff in attendance, members of the Supreme Court as well. And then so moving to see so many thousands and thousands of members of the public, ordinary people, filing through the United States Capitol rotunda in less than desirable weather conditions, temperatures in the teens in the Washington, D.C. area, yet many people brave the cold for upwards of hours to be able to say a final goodbye to Jimmy Carter.
Yeah, and that followed the public visitation period that was held at the Carter Center. I was out there on Tuesday night and was also struck by how cold it was here in Atlanta. You know, we're not used to it getting quite this cold usually here in the South, but a lot of people came out and paid their respects. This is really beautiful right now. You've got members of the Armed Forces band here to play and ceremonial troops that will present arms. Let's take a listen in to what things sound like there on the ground. This appears to be the Maneuver Center of Excellence Band, and they are approaching Special Air Mission 39, awaiting President Carter's remains to be brought off the plane. This is all very ceremonial and very intentional, what's been planned to take place here. There will be a presentation of colors, followed by several songs that the band will play to honor former President Carter.
And these are live pictures from Lawson Army Field in Fort Moore, down in Columbus, Georgia, where the former president is arriving to make his final return home to Plains, where he will be buried in a private ceremony later this afternoon after a funeral service at Maranatha Baptist Church, where the former president and his late wife called their religious home. Was a preacher there on several Sundays, and a beloved place for the former president, in addition to his hometown of Plains, as we await for the casket to be brought off the aircraft. Let's check in with Fox 5's Christine Spiro, who's leading our coverage from Plains this afternoon. Christine, yet another poignant sight here as we await the former president to be brought off that plane in what has been a remarkable funeral service for the late president.
Yeah, Tom, here in Plains is where it all started for Jimmy Carter, and where it will end today with his burial later this evening. It has been really, the sun has been shining on the town of Plains this whole day today. It's going to be a perfect backdrop for a final farewell for the 39th President of the United States. We've already been seeing activity behind us here. I'm right along Highway 280 right here in downtown Plains, and these folks here just beyond the barricades have been securing their spot for the last couple hours at least, waiting to get a glimpse of the former president's motorcade once they get into Plains. I spoke with some of the folks in the crowd. One of them, it's funny, none of them consider Jimmy Carter a stranger. He is a hometown boy here in Plains. I spoke with one family who knew the Carters. One of the matriarchs of the family actually babysat, she said, some of the Carter children. So they showed me pictures of Jimmy Carter and Rosalind Carter at their family reunion. They were invited and they showed up to it. That's the way the Carters were. And they said they would not miss this for the world. Even some of their extended relatives drove in from Atlanta just to be a part of it as well. So it has been truly just a buzz here to some degree, because this will be the final time that they will see Mr. Carter, see his casket go down the highway here. From what we understand, once the motorcade gets into town, they will go to Plains High School to just make a stop there, and then the motorcade will continue to Maranatha Baptist Church, where that service will begin with the family. This will be more of a private service. Members of his Secret Service staff will be a part of that as well. It will be much more intimate from what we have seen with some of these previous services today out in Washington, D.C. In particular. So a lot of people looking forward to this moment here for this truly final farewell, Tom and Courtney, to the Carters. You know, this is where he started his political career. We've talked so much about his governorship here in Georgia and, of course, his presidency and ascending all the way to the White House. But his first service to his political career was as a member of the Sumter County Board of Education. And, you know, education was a huge platform for him, not only at that level, but he carried that into the governorship when he was governor of Georgia and into the White House as well, being a critical part of creating the Department of Education. So, so much history here when you walk around Plains and when you talk to the people of Plains and talk to the people here who made it a point to be here for this moment and witness history, Tom and Courtney.
Yeah, it's so interesting getting all of these perspectives from people who were there in Plains, who are at a later age, who might have been there, might have been members of the Peanut Brigade that worked to help him get elected, or just people who knew them as Jimmy and Rosalind, as members of their Plains community. Christine, but it's just such a poignant way to end what's been 9 days that have been so carefully and thoughtfully planned out, especially with him having lived to be 100 years old. There was so much time to think about all of these things. As we take another look here at the Lawson Army Field in Fort Moore, as we were waiting for the remains of former President Carter to come off of that plane. But as to what Christine was saying, I do think it's so beautiful to get all of these personal perspectives from people on the Carters, just as who they were as people, because as a nation we knew them as the president and first lady, but there are just so many more personal layers that come out when you start to hear people's stories.
Yeah, and that's been the common thread throughout our coverage and remembrance of the former president, that he was in many ways the president of the United States and the most powerful man in the world, but yet a common man, somebody that was so relatable to so many people. Heard anecdotes about how he slept in people's homes when he was campaigning for president, supporters' homes, and how he really began his campaign knocking on doors, the old shoe leather way of meeting and greeting so many thousands and thousands of people in what would be his road to the White House. This event that's taken place here over the past couple of weeks now has done so in such a precise manner. Every moment of what we've been seeing has been meticulously planned out by the former president and his family. And the way that it was conducted up in Washington, D.C., with the transfer of his remains to the horse-drawn carriage in front of the U.S. Navy Memorial there, which is within eyeshot of the U.S. Capitol building, and the clip-clopping of the horses carrying the wagon up to the steps of the United States Capitol, and his body placed in the rotunda were just spectacular sights to see.
Yeah, let's get out to our Rob D'Arienzo, who's covering another angle of this for us. Rob, there's so much to expect as the remains come off the plane and make their way to Maranatha Baptist Church for that private funeral service. What can we look ahead to with that?
Yeah, that's right, guys. This is a place that Jimmy Carter has called home for so many years, teaching Sunday school here nearly every Sunday, well into his 90s. His wife, Rosalind, here spent so much time in this community. They all come back here one more time to say goodbye to the 39th president. I want to take a step out of the way to show you what the door is looking like. We do see mourners coming in. These are all close friends, family members, dignitaries, and all from the pallbearers will bring the casket through that front door. The ceremonial troops will then present arms and render honors and hail to the chief. The 282nd Army Band will play How Firm a Foundation as the pallbearers escort the casket into the church. And again, you can see people making their way into the church. Every once in a while, we'll see these buses lined up, coming in with a lot more people who want to be here today, who really want to experience history and pay their respects directly to Jimmy Carter, not just the former president, but Jimmy Carter, the community leader here. There's so many stories of him actually mowing this lawn in his earlier years, or before his health started to deteriorate, as well as him building a wooden cross that now sits in the sanctuary. This place, in so many ways, defined former President Jimmy Carter's legacy, and this is where everybody will gather in just a little while to say their goodbyes before he is buried at his home. Back to you.
Rob, we're getting an idea of what that service is going to look like. Maybe you could color it in for us a little bit. This is, as you said, in front of Maranatha, and it's going to be the extended it's private funeral service, unlike what we saw in Washington, D.C. This is a funeral service for just the Carter family, the extended family, members of that congregation, and some folks in Plains who called the Carters friends.
Yeah, there are many people who just refer to him simply as Jimmy around here, and a lot of people here felt a piece of them died that day when former President Carter did pass away. So there are a lot of people in his close inner circle. We know that we're going to be hearing from his grandson, Hugo Wenzel, who will be reading scripture during the service. And then as for what happens inside after that, we don't have too much guidance on what everything will look like, but there will be military salutes. The 21 arms will be played as he is escorted out of the church and then finally brought through downtown Plains and to his final resting place. So it's going to be an emotional day, but again, yeah, a very intimate gathering here. The former president has spent his entire life, essentially, especially after the presidency, in the public eye. Today is all about the close family and friends, loved ones, and yeah, just everyday people here in Plains who grew to love the former president.
Such a fitting send-off when you think about it. Rob, thanks, of President Carter, the man, and yet, despite all of the pomp and ceremony here that we've seen really over the past 2 weeks, sort of the humbleness also that's been a part of this service. It's been quite remarkable.
It really has been. I mean, it's something that has come to my mind quite frequently over these past 9 days, just thinking about who Carter was as a man, the humility, the small townness of him, and how he really held to that his whole life. It just underlines the fact that this is really something that's bigger than one person. It's really bigger than him. It's when a president dies, we bury a president in a certain way. And so we're getting to see what that tradition looks like. And I would assume that if it were fully up to the former president, he might have done things a little differently than what we've seen. But there's so much that is sort of set in the way that we bury presidents. And it really has been fascinating to watch. But also just so much reverence has been used, and so much care has been taken to give the family those private moments, as we've seen both in the Capitol and hear what we are about to see as they return his body to Plains. But it's been so beautiful. Also, just hearing about, as Rob was mentioning, about the service that will take place at Maranatha Baptist, that his personal pastor will preside over those remarks. That's Tony Loudon. So I would imagine that he would have a lot of personal things to say about who Jimmy Carter was as a person, what kind of a faith he carried, the things that he might have learned from having him as part of his life. But there was also some reporting that we had done over the past week from members of Maranatha Baptist Church talking about the Sunday school lessons that Carter taught and the thousands of people that came from all over the world to hear him preach at that tiny church, which now I understand has only 30 members. So it's a very small church.
And this devotion started at a very young age. He showed deep commitment to his Christianity and has been a deacon at this church, teaching Sunday school, dating all the way back to the early 1940s. So a very meaningful place, not only for the late president, but his family, as you see them walking off Special Air Mission 39. Let's check in with Eric Perry now. Eric, we'll watch these pictures together of the family coming off the plane as we await the remains of the late President Jimmy Carter. Just some of your thoughts there on the streets in a place where people know the former president so well.
Yeah, Tom, Courtney, hello to both of you. It's been so interesting. I've been there in Atlanta talking a lot about the hometown of Plains. So it's an amazing feeling being here in the city that he loved so much. We'll get into that in just a moment. Within the past 30 minutes, I talked with those officials there because it is running a little bit behind. We can give you an updated timeline of what is expected to happen. You're seeing there the images from the ground in Columbus. He is expected to go right through here around 4:45 and take a left up there and head to the church Maranatha. That is where that flyover is expected to take place, somewhere around 5:10, and we'll be able to see it here. I'm out with many of the people who came from all over to pay their respects to the president. Now, that ceremony is expected to last about an hour, so they're expecting around 6:15. The family is expected to get off up here close to where the high school is, and then they will walk behind the hearse. Let's take you to this map here to show you. So we are here on this level here. This is 280. This is where his hometown and this is his home. They'll come right up through here, take this left, and that's where they'll go up to Maranatha Baptist Church, and then they'll do the reverse of that. Around 6:15, the family is expected to get out and walk behind the hearse right around here and walk through the town of Plains. I want to show you all throughout here. They've been lined up since early this morning, and you can see law enforcement coming from all over. I've seen Colquitt County, I've seen Fulton County Sheriff, I've seen Cherokee County. They will line this area to make sure everything is safe there. But of course, we want to make sure that we are out here with the people who loved him most. Tom, Courtney.
Yeah, just so beautiful what is to come and what's already happened and what we're seeing right now with the Carter family gathering there to hear what will be a series of songs played by the military band, Eric. But it's great to hear about what personal things will be put into the plan. With the family walking behind the hearse, it almost brings to mind the Carters walking down Pennsylvania Avenue at his inauguration, something that he was the first president to do, really as a man of the people and giving that personal touch. So that will be really beautiful to see.
Eric, thanks. That was how that was sort of planned, except it happened in the opposite direction. Obviously not headed toward the White House down Pennsylvania Avenue, but headed to the Capitol building, which is in the direct opposite direction, if you will. And then people lining up along Pennsylvania Avenue, just as they did when he was elected president, to witness this man walking toward the White House after what was a very tumultuous time politically in our country, right on the heels of Watergate, defeating President Ford at the time to ascend to the presidency and take this country in a different direction. Those people, once again, in his death, lined Pennsylvania Avenue waiting to say their final goodbye, as his family is doing right now waiting there on the tarmac of Lawson Army Field in Fort Moore. This is in Columbus, Georgia, waiting for the remains of the former president to come off of Special Air Mission 39 before it makes its way back into Plains for one last trip through that small community, so that well-wishers there who have already lined the streets can say their final goodbye. They perhaps knew Carter on a much more personal level, given his involvement in that community.
Yeah, I would imagine every single person in Plains has a personal story they could tell if you asked them about the Carters, both Jimmy and Rosalind. You know, I find it so inspiring. They're 77 years that they were married, and how often he would bring up Rosalind if you asked him about an accomplishment that he made. It really wasn't about him, it was about them and the two of them. Just knowing that they had a lot of the same friends that they had before they went to Washington and lived in the same home for so many years. It really does put down roots in a community that goes so deeply, and you're really seeing it throughout all of this. As we now get our first glimpse of the casket coming off of Special Air Mission 39. Let's listen in to what that sounds like as they are loading the remains off the plane.
Present on! Right shoulder on. Come forward. March. Colors, hope.
A 21-gun salute to greet the longest-lived president of the United States, Jimmy Carter, 39th president. Fairest Lord Jesus being played by the Maneuver Center of Excellence Band there in Fort Moore, Georgia, as the family boards a vehicle that will take them and the remains of the former president to his beloved Maranatha Baptist Church, where there will be a private service with family members, community members, and parishioners of the church.
It was beautiful. Really struck a chord emotionally to just see the care and the respect that they took to honor the former president's remains as they came off the plane, and you saw members of the Carter family gathered there to receive the remains. Just so beautiful. The band, the way they played, everything has been so beautifully done over these last 9 days. Another intentional thing that was done for this arrival ceremony here is among the invited guests were 200 members of the former president's Secret Service detail. That's the amount of people, over 200 people served on that detail over the course of his protection since he was president, since 1981. And so it's unclear how many were able to make it today, but for those who did, I'm sure it was a way for them to reunite and to catch up. I'm sure they had a lot of stories to share. I would imagine that you really get to know a president and their family members when you serve on their personal security detail. They get a front seat to a lot of what goes on, and I'm sure they have personal stories that they may never share about the Carters. But so nice for them to be included in that way in this arrival ceremony. So
for the Carter family, they've been reconciling sort of losing a father and a grandfather and a great-grandfather, while honoring the fact that the nation is mourning his loss as well. A very private moment for this family, shared with the entire nation and the world for that matter, as many dignitaries from overseas, other countries attended the funeral service today at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. Plains, Georgia, where the remains of the former president, his beloved hometown, is headed, shaped his basic ethics and principles, according to Jimmy Carter. They never forgot where they came from. And as we see the hearse pull off the airfield now, where he will return for one last time to be greeted by members of that very community.
Yeah, so many people are awaiting this motorcade as it makes its way into Plains. The drive, about 55 miles distance between Lawson Army Airfield and Maranatha Baptist Church. But again, according to the plan, we understand there will be some stops made along the way. In fact, I take that back. I think they are going straight to Maranatha Baptist Church, but they'll be going by way of Richland and Preston as they make their way through. But so many people have been waiting in Plains, as we saw with Christine, and then there near the church where Rob's location is. There's just so much to come. But it is so symbolic that this is a return. It's a homecoming. Oftentimes we refer to a funeral as a homegoing in a lot of circles, mainly Baptist circles. But
fitting here, right?
Yeah, it really is a homegoing in so many ways. To see him return to where it all started out.
We heard from President Biden eulogizing President Carter earlier today, and the majesty of a service like that. I imagine at Maranatha this evening, it's going to be a much more personal experience, some more personal stories, and eulogies are going to be told by family members and friends of the Carters who have known them for so many years.
Yeah. The personal pastor of so many years. We understand it's been the same organist at that church for so many years. And the Maranatha Baptist Church Choir will be singing as part of the service. So it really is that personal versus the national goodbye that was said today at the National Cathedral. It will be so nice for the family to have that opportunity. Let's get back out to our Christine Spiro, who's been leading our coverage from Plains. Christine, we see the hearse, the motorcade is now on the move, headed that way, and there are a lot of people there who are awaiting its arrival.
Yeah, and these folks are not going to move an inch until they see the moment that this motorcade passes by. I'm actually right at the intersection where the family of Jimmy Carter. Well, this is where they will disembark and get out of the vehicle and begin walking from this intersection to the Carter family home. So that will be a key and poignant moment for those folks who got a prime position here along Highway 80 to see that moment. You talk about how this town has shaped Jimmy Carter. He has often talked about his own parents, Earl and Lillian Carter, and how they shaped him in a lot of ways as well. You know, Jimmy, of course, was born and raised here in Plains, Georgia, and his neighbors, all of his neighbors were black. All of his friends were black. It wasn't until he got to school where he realized that whites were segregated from blacks, and segregation and racism was legal in our country at that time. And that really, for him, shaped his positions and how he wanted people to be treated, and the fairness and justice that everyone in society deserved. It shouldn't just be for a small few. We talked about a little bit about Maranatha Baptist Church, his home church, where, as you guys talked about, he taught Sunday school lessons, and I actually got to listen to one of those lessons. It was his final lesson that he taught at 95 years old back in 2019, when he was strong enough to teach his final lesson. And it was so poignant to hear teachings of the word from him and what the word meant to him. And he talked about having the Holy Spirit in your heart. And when you have the Holy Spirit in your heart, you will feel the presence of Christ. And that, in a lot of ways, is how Jimmy Carter operated. He not only loved Christ and loved God, but he loved the person in front of him as well, whoever that person was. You would see a lot of personality in Mr. Carter during those Sunday school lessons. We're talking about upwards of 500 to 600 people who would crowd into this small church here in Plains, and when he would first come out to greet some of the people who came to listen to his Sunday school lesson, he would say, are there any visitors in the house? And that would usually get a lot of laughs from people, because, of course, with a 500 to 600 people, there were people from across the country and in some cases around the world who would come all the way to this tiny town of Plains just to hear a lesson from the 39th President of the United States. So it's so fitting that the final services for Mr. Carter will be at Maranatha Baptist Church. In fact, they were very involved in the whole planning and process of this remembrance the last several days, and it was important to Mr. Carter to have the state funeral in Washington, D.C. and his burial take place on the same day. So with the schedule being a little bit behind today, that is still going to be the plan that's in place. That burial will take place a little bit later than was scheduled, but from what we understand with the speeches, the beautiful speeches and the eulogies at the Washington Cathedral today, they went a bit long, so it has pushed some of that time back, Tom and Courtney. But truly, this stretch behind me of 280, when the family eventually gets out of the vehicle and starts walking down Highway 80 and seeing the lines of people who are going to be paying their last respects, it's truly going to be, I would imagine, a very moving moment for them as well.
Yeah, it's remarkable, Christine, just seeing the scene behind you there and thinking about Carter the man when he was president of the United States in Washington, D.C., and Plains, Georgia. Just, you couldn't have more polar opposite environments. When they returned home to Plains, which was often, it was like a hometown. He wasn't president of the United States. He was, but you know, he was a common man. And even at that time, when he was such a high-profile figure, he could just walk down the street.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Here they called him Mr. Jimmy, and they called Rosalind Carter Miss Rosalind. That's the way they greeted and treated each other here, because, like you said, Tom, he was part of them.
So sweet. Yeah, it has to warm their hearts for the Carter family members who are going to be a part of this, to be able to walk down and just be surrounded by all the love and all the support of their entire community, people who knew them personally. Christine, thanks. Our Rob D'Arienzo has been standing by outside of the church where the hearse is now headed. on its way to a private service there at Maranatha Baptist Church. Rob, it looks like we're getting close to the time when the family will be able to have that private service there.
Yeah, Courtney, I have to say there's a degree of finality in the air. After years of planning and anticipation, we knew that the former president's health was obviously deteriorating. He spent 2 years in hospice, and after all of this planning and all of this holding breath, there is a sigh of relief today, I think, among the loved ones of Jimmy Carter who will come here to honor his life and legacy. Maranatha Baptist Church, from the very pulpit he used to preach from every Sunday, or nearly every Sunday, he'd get hundreds and hundreds of people to this tiny town of Plains. He had a couple rules for them. I don't want any handshakes. I don't want any applause. I don't want any pageantry. I just want to preach the word to you. And that's what he did for so many years, even into his later years. Him and Rosalind Carter sitting at home when their health started to fail them, they still watched the services here at Maranatha via YouTube at home, just up the road every single Sunday as their health permitted. Just goes to show how dedicated both Jimmy and Rosalind Carter were dedicated to their faith, and all of it just kind of coming together for a final closure today for the friends, the family, the people who knew him here in Plains, Georgia for all of those years. It all comes down to this. So just a little while, we're going to see that hearse make its way down through downtown Plains. It's going to make a brief stop here as it enters. I want to take a step out of the way to just show you what everything's looking like right now. And it's going to come down here. We've seen park rangers, we've seen members of the military filing in, just everybody really that was touched by Jimmy Carter individually on a personal level. So they're going to come into this parking lot right here, and then the casket will be brought in to these front doors here where you see people gathering, milling about right now. So it's kind of a waiting game right now. As it's been mentioned, he's been running, the procession has been running behind, but everybody here is just gathered to say their final goodbyes and pay their respects to the former president.
Yeah, Robin, again, I'll say to you what I said to Christine about the striking difference between the scene at the National Cathedral this morning, Rob DiRienzo, thanks so much, and the scene playing out at Maranatha. Just two different situations where you had so many dignitaries and former presidents, current president there eulogizing him, and his hometown community with just folks that he knew, members of his parish, and of course his immediate family there.
Folks is a good word to use there, because I think that's a word that would be, it's a good way to describe the feeling of the people who knew him best. Speaking of which, Eric Perry is also standing by for us in Plains, where a lot of folks are gathered, Eric, to receive the motorcade with the hearse as it passes through. It looks like a lot of people behind you there, Eric. It seems like they are willing to wait as long as is possible to greet the motorcade as it arrives.
Yeah, Courtney, Tom, I love what you said earlier, where you said it's usually called a homegoing, but this is a homecoming. They want to make sure that Jimmy Carter gets the send-off that they say he deserves here in Plains. So within the past couple of minutes, they've included more barricades that are right through here. We're just going to kind of walk and talk a little bit. We are now learning more of the actual timeline of everything that's taken place. 4:45 is when they're expected to come right through here. This is between the church and his home, where he will be laid to rest. Then around 5:10 is expected where the flyover is expected to take place here. And then around 6:15 they're expected to go off and then walk behind the hearse. I want to walk you through, because a lot of people said they want to make sure that they are here with the former president because he loved Plains. There are two things he wanted included in his funeral services. One of them was to make sure that the first service was at the Carter Center, but he wanted to make sure that his final goodbye, his final farewell was in Plains, the city that he loved so much. Take a look I'm on the other side of where Christine Spiro was, and you can just see the long line of people who have came out early since 8 o'clock this morning. I got here around 10:30, 11 o'clock, and there was already a lot of people here. They've claimed their spots, they've taken their spaces, but many of them, they don't just refer to him as the former president, they refer to him as Mr. Jimmy, a personal friend. Everyone has their own special memory. They have their own personal connection to him, who really put this small town on the map here. One lady who came from Jacksonville, Florida, says one random Sunday she came up and she just sat inside of his Sunday school class. Another woman says that they came right after the inauguration here when he was president, and they came and walked the streets there, and her little girl was someone who just walked up to the president all casually, and he picked her up and held her. Those are the personal memories that many people are saying. We've seen a lot of different sheriff's office, the law enforcement people out here as well, lining the streets that they will plan here as well. You can take a look right through there. Different service members. We've seen Fulton County, we've seen Colquitt County, we've seen Cherokee County, all coming together to say their final goodbyes here. Again, that final timeline, as you know, they are heading right here. 4:45 is when they're expected to come down Highway 280. They're going to take a left to go right to the church, and then that flyover is expected around 5:10. And then the reverse of that service lasting about an hour there inside, I'm told. And then they will get out at this intersection and they will walk behind the hearse to the final resting place. Courtney, Tom.
Eric, I think it's worth mentioning, I mean, we talk about what a special place Plains is to the former president. For those of us who haven't been there, and you're there now, how big of a community we're talking about, or what a small town it is. Can you give us some perspective as to Plains itself? What kind of place is it where the former president is headed toward his final resting place?
Yeah, Tom, Courtney, let me tell you, you can walk this area. There are no stoplights through here. The closest city is Americus, is where we stayed, but we came through here this morning. A friendly town. This is a town where he wasn't just the president, he was a neighbor. He was someone you would see out in the community. And those people, they're the ones who are coming out to say their final goodbyes. Everyone knows your name. Everyone knows where you're from, even those surrounding areas through here. I'm going to step out the way just so you can see, again, the people that are here. They have American flags. But this is a town that was small. It was intimate. It was quaint. And it was a town that he loved. And to be honest with you, they loved him, and they said that's why it's so important that they're here for the final time to give him the send-off that they say he deserves.
Yeah, it really does paint the picture, and it's really beautiful to see the community aspect just behind you, Eric. You see people with, we've got chairs and blankets, and they really came prepared to stay a while. So it's almost like they're, again, I don't think they'll be deterred by how cold it gets or how long they have to wait. I know we're behind schedule, but it looks like people are willing to wait.
This is personal for them.
It is.
To be able to say a final goodbye.
Yeah.
Eric Perry live along the route where we're waiting the hearse of the former president to pass through. Eric, thanks so much. We're joined now, I believe, by Dr. Charles Bullock. He is a professor at the University of Georgia who knows a lot about the former president. Professor, thanks so much for joining us on this very special evening and what will be the conclusion of our remembrances, at least the remembrances of the remains of the former president, his funeral lasting 2 weeks here. If you could also shed some light on the man and your takeaway on this week's events.
Well, really, it's quite a send-off. I'm sure some people who remember back what happened in 1980 when he lost re-election, and you know, at that point you would not have thought that there would be this outpouring of support and remembrance of him, because when he left D.C., he was very much shaken by the event, was very disappointed, and my guess is maybe even thought that he would not be remembered this fondly as he has been today. So history, there's an interesting way that it turns upon itself, and that people who at one point are down and not thought particularly highly of, they may get essentially almost like reborn in the public mind. And with that reborn, people will then focus on the positive aspects of their lives. And so we've heard an awful lot about what Jimmy Carter did in the 44 years that he was not president, his long post-presidency, and maybe what he is going to be best remembered for by history, by the activities that he himself and his wife did working with Habitat for Humanity, but then also the vast range of activities of the Carter Center. And the Carter Center, of course, is going to go on and remain long after Jimmy is buried later on today.
It's so interesting you bring that up, Dr. Bullock, because in all of the remembrances of who Jimmy Carter is as a person and what he accomplished in his very long humanitarian work career post-presidency, I think that is something that's gotten lost, is the absolutely devastating political defeat he suffered when he lost re-election. It was actually something he talked about in his book, which he said led to him feeling great purpose that he found in the founding of the Carter Center and all of that humanitarian work. But when we talk about the Carter years, the Carter presidency, I know that's being talked about right now and being re-examined in some ways, or I should say reevaluated. What do you think that represents as we get a chance to look at it once again? What's died with President Carter in terms of that political era?
Well, yeah, that was seems like an awfully long time ago, when even individuals who were of opposite parties and maybe didn't personally like one another that much, nonetheless could get along, could be friendly, so you could disagree without being disagreeable. So it was a very different time in Washington, D.C., where Democrats and Republicans could debate, vigorously, vote against each other. But once they got beyond that, then once they were no longer, say, in the Capitol, they could go together, share a meal, and enjoy one another's company. So, that has all been lost, where now, rather than, I think Bob Dole, who was Republican leader of a generation or more ago, he said, Democrats, they're the opposition. They are not the enemy. And unfortunately today, often people who are in public life do look at the other side as being the enemy. Don't think Jimmy Carter did that. Indeed, I think given his background, his raising, he would have very much bought into the idea that we can disagree but not be disagreeable, because whatever your values are, you're trying to do what is best, or what you think is going to be best for the nation.
We saw an extraordinary bipartisan show of support for the former president when he was there lying in state in the Capitol Rotunda. Speeches from the House Majority Leader Mike Johnson, a Republican, John Thune, the Republican Senate Majority Leader, a bipartisan delegation from the United States Supreme Court. Symbolic, perhaps, of Jimmy Carter, who many would argue is not a Democrat in the current sense of the political word. He wrote legislation, even though he enjoyed a Democratic Congress at the time, that needed and enjoyed, for that matter, Republican support. So in many ways, he was a different political creature than his current day party in many ways.
Well, he was, yeah. I mean, he was very much of a moderate, and so even in late 1970s, he would have been towards the more conservative end of the Democratic Party, and therefore would not have been that far a reach for him to join forces with some Republicans. And some of the things which he did, like deregulation of the airline industry, deregulation of trucking, when we talk about deregulation, we think that, well, that's more of a Republican kind of policy. So he was doing things which could attract some broadband support in that nature.
To that end, does it surprise you that the family had said when we were still waiting when Jimmy Carter was still on hospice care, it had been reported by the family that he couldn't wait to cast his vote for Vice President Kamala Harris. Did it surprise you at all that he would say that?
No, I mean, he was always a Democrat, right? So, I mean, what we've heard recently is that his best friend among former presidents was not Bill Clinton or Barack Obama. It was the man who actually he beat, Gerald Ford. And Gerald Ford's son did read the comments that his father prepared in case Gerald Ford had outlived Carter. So, no, as I say, he had friends on the other side of the aisle, and very, very close friends. But nonetheless, he certainly thought of himself as a Democrat and was going to continue to vote for Democrats. And who knows, it may have been one of the things which got him to 100, was wanting to make sure he stayed alive longer to vote for Kamala Harris. Indeed, I think he said that one of the things he was living for was to make sure he could cast his vote. I think it's also interesting that here he is, he's 100 years old, and yet he's still taking his responsibility as a citizen very seriously. kind of the interesting irony is that the group in our society which is least likely to vote are those who are at the very opposite end of where Carter is, those who are 18 to 25. We're here, this grand old gentleman at 100. He says, "By golly, I want to make sure I'm going to vote." I think he cast an absentee ballot, I believe.
Yeah, doing his civic duty up until the very end. Dr. Charles Bullock from the University of Georgia, stick with us. Thanks so much. Amazing perspective. Joining us now here on set, Dr. Joe Crespino of Emory University. I was saying earlier, you could write an encyclopedia on Jimmy Carter. You know him well. You've taught classes about him. You've enjoyed the company of the late president who sat in on some of your classes. He was, ironically, an outsider, just like his successor, Ronald Reagan, but he conducted himself very differently in Washington, D.C., perhaps to a fault, not as robustly as some might have liked him to.
Yeah, that's right. When President Carter ran, he was really the first of what is a wave in the last 40 or 50 years of presidents running from outside the Beltway. But President Carter was the first to really pioneer that strategy. And he was the first to recognize the importance of kind of the caucuses, the Iowa caucuses, the early primaries. That's why the Peanut Brigade going to Iowa allowed him to break through from this very crowded Democratic primary campaign in 1976 and really come out of nowhere. I mean, a one-term governor of a small southern state. It was a really crowded, almost 20 candidates in that primary campaign. And he won in the aftermath of the devastation around Watergate and the demoralization around that. And he ran as a candidate, I'll never lie to you. That's what he pledged to the American people. And he ran this kind of populist campaign. Once he got to the White House, there's kind of there's advantages and disadvantages of being an outsider. When you're an outsider and now you're in the White House, there's a lot of kind of insider knowledge that can be helpful when you're actually there. And President Carter and his close, advisors didn't have that knowledge, and so that was a hindrance in many ways, and it led to some of the difficulties that he experienced once he got to the White House. But that's kind of that was part of his appeal, is to bring new energy and new perspectives to the White House.
I find it so funny that President Carter sort of embraced the whole Jimmy Who line. That was something that was really created almost by his opponents, right, as a way to ridicule his small town and where he was from, and the fact that he didn't really have the national profile. But what do you think that says about his ability to leverage his background and his humble beginnings to ascend all the way to the White House?
Well, there's a great tradition in American politics of the populist figure, right? The figure of the people going to, bringing an authentic representation of the people. And you've got to remember, in 1976, the United States was not only coming off of Watergate, but the demoralization of the Vietnam War, revelations about the way that war had been waged in secret for so many years. And so Jimmy Carter, coming as someone who was not from Washington, as someone who was honest, who came from the people. I mean, that's the remarkable thing about watching these images of President Carter and his family returning to Plains, is just to remember how unlikely it was that someone from a tiny place like Plains, Georgia, could ascend to the highest realms of power in the United States. And it's a great kind of affirmation then and now of America's commitment to equality, to opportunity, to freedom. That, and it's what all parents still to today say to their children who are ambitious, who are smart, who are talented. Hey, maybe someday you can grow up and become president. And that's what, no doubt Lillian Carter said that to young Jimmy, because he was bright and he was ambitious and he read books when he was 12 years old, like War and Peace, and he had great ambitions, and he had a remarkable life and a remarkable career. Yeah,
and as we were waiting the motorcade to pass through Plains, getting some real invaluable perspective from you. Hindsight is always 20/20, but had Carter not suffered such a brutal political defeat, as we watch the motorcade come around the corner here, and enjoyed a second term as president. We know he was very, very disappointed, in fact, perhaps demoralized after suffering such a profound loss to Ronald Reagan. Did that kind of give him the fuel and the impetus to make such an impression and a lasting legacy in his post-presidency? Did that give him the tinder, if you will, to light the fire under the Carter Center and be such a prolific figure on the world stage even after his presidency?
I think that President Carter always had a fire in his belly. You know, you had to have a fire in your belly to come from Plains, Georgia, and ascend to the presidency. It is devastating to lose the presidency, to have so many people relying on you, contributing to your campaign, to have so many hopes riding on your efforts, to be there at the height of power and then have the American people vote you out. That's an incredibly devastating thing. But I think one of the reasons why you see this incredible outpouring of affection and admiration for President Carter is, you know, you go through a devastation like that, a personal defeat of the kind that few people in the world ever experience. And, you know, you pick yourself up and you move on. And there are a lot of people who've had really hard things that happen in their life, and it's hard to be resilient and to carry on. And I think, you know, you saw President Carter to do that and have an incredible second act in his life as a humanitarian, someone who would never kind of, you know, it would have been very easy to go back to Georgia and just kind of sulk and, you know, go on the speaking circuit. But President Carter wasn't about to do that. And he carved out an incredible, you know, career after leaving the presidency.
Some say more impactful than even his presidency as a whole.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, certainly it's an unprecedented career as a post-president. No one has had that kind of influence that President Carter's had, certainly.
There's so much we could talk about with someone like you who has made a career of studying not only American history, but especially with Carter's presidency. But you also were able to meet him personally on several occasions as a member of the Emory faculty. Tell us a little bit about what that was like and how he was as a person when you got those interactions with him.
Yeah, it was a wonderful thing to call President Carter my colleague. Yeah. He was a university professor at Emory for over 40 years, and he was regularly on campus. He famously each year would do the town hall, a town hall for all of Emory's freshmen, you know, the incoming students, that became a kind of rite of passage for generations of Emory students. But he would also come to classes regularly, and, you know, and of course, given his expertise on so many things, he could speak to all sorts of classes. I taught a class in the history department that was a research seminar in which students did research out of his presidential archives. And so they would write original research papers on some aspect of his presidency, and then President Carter would come to the final class, and students would ask him, you know, questions based on their research. And what was remarkable was that you know, always before he came, several weeks before, one of his aides would call me and say, now tell me about, President Carter wants to know what the topics are about, and I would give him write a paragraph on each of the students' papers, and he would study it, and he would come. Of course, he was famously punctual. He would always come, you know,
and meticulous. I'm sure he read every word of what you wrote.
Absolutely. So he would come 5 minutes before he was supposed to be there. He'd be ready to go. He would, you know, start looking through his notes. Who's writing on this? And then, you know, they would have this conversation. And, you know, sometimes students would write on topics that he had spoken about a lot, like the decision to boycott the 1980 Olympics. But sometimes they would write on topics that he hadn't thought about in years, and they could kind of catch him off guard. And it led to some remarkable exchanges where President Carter would, you know, reflect. And I wish, oftentimes I wish you'd have a tape recorder there to get down some of the things that he said and remembered. It was remarkable.
Was he up for healthy debate among the students?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. You know, President Carter was teaching at Emory when he published his book, Peace Not Apartheid, which was a controversial book, a hard-hitting book. And it was hard-hitting on the Emory campus, and there were a lot of people who were upset by that, and students would come ready to debate him about things he'd written in that book or views he had on the Middle East. And you know, these are oftentimes 19 or 20-year-old kids, right? But who would be speaking to a former president. But he would never speak to them as 19 or 20-year-old kids. He would speak to them with respect. He would take their ideas seriously. And they were smart kids, and they had good points. And we had good debates in that class. And it was really, it was just a testament to his humility, to his seriousness of purpose, you know, just to the care that he had for the Emory community, for the students, and for doing his job well, you know, to come in there and engage so seriously and fully with our students. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience.
And see, these are live pictures that you're watching of the motorcade, if you will, of the remains of former President Jimmy Carter making its way from Lawson Army Field, where Special Air Mission 39 touched down about 2 hours ago, and the remains of the president came off the plane to a 21-gun salute, and now is en route to Maranatha Baptist Church, where he will have a private service with family and parishioners of the church and some local community members there. We saw the streets lined with people waiting to, you know, say a final farewell, perhaps people that might have known the late president personally in that small community.
Yeah, we understand that this was very important to the Carters to have this sort of personal touch as a way to send him home there in the community that he loved so much and came to represent throughout so much of his life and presidency. And again, we've been following the route of the motorcade as it's made its way from Lawson Army Airfield into downtown Plains, where it will actually arrive first to Maranatha Baptist Church for a private funeral service for the family members to be able to have their chance to say goodbye, aside from all of the pomp and circumstance and the grandeur that we saw at the National Cathedral, which was so beautiful, of course. And we have our crews fanned out throughout the area to be able to give you that perspective from the ground, but we are getting that perspective from the sky right now, from Sky Fox, showing us as the motorcade makes its way into Plains.
Beautiful tree-lined highway there, down in Plains and in the surrounding areas. We're with Dr. Joe Crespino of Emory University. President Carter was a people's president, if you will. He loved engaging with the public and being a regular guy, almost to the point where he really didn't play the game of what many politicians do, and they pal around behind the scenes. We saw President-elect Donald Trump and former President Barack Obama, not necessarily two guys that I would envision hanging out with each other, but really engaging with each other at that funeral. I'm sure the late president would have been pleased to see that, but he wasn't necessarily a close member of that former president's club. He didn't necessarily enjoy palling around with them very much. In fact, he had an adversarial relationship with some of them, but he didn't really enjoy those types of events or moments.
Yeah, President Carter, as a post-president, as an ex-president, was outspoken about events that were going on. And, you know, oftentimes he would make news, commenting on the news at the Emory Town Hall when he was talking to the freshmen, and there would be, you know, national news headlines about him commenting in some critical way to one of, and some, at the time, some people saw that as kind of violating the code of the, you know, ex-president fraternity, right? You're not, you know, keeping your mouth shut. It's a hard job, you know. But President Carter, famously, you know, he was going to speak his mind. He was going to tell the truth. And when people asked him a question about what he thought about something, he would tell the truth. And so, yeah, I think there were ways in which maybe he you know, didn't get as much personal satisfaction out of kind of clubbing around with former presidents, but he had work to do. He had work to do around the world with the Carter Center, and he would speak his mind. You know, speaking about the scene today from the funeral, though, I did think that was really important, and I think it was a great
to see the congeniality between presidents.
Yeah, it's a reminder, you know, of the old saying that, you know, funerals, they're not for the dead, they're for the living. And they're for us. And
at a time when our nation really could use some unity and some images of people coming together.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that the dignity and the seriousness, the somberness with which the Carter family have and the Carter Center has planned this week has been a great gift to the nation. To remember not only President Carter, but to reflect the dignity of the office of the president and the dignity of the nation. And that this is a country where someone can come from a place like Plains, Georgia, and become president. We are and remain a great democracy. And this was the events this week were a celebration of American democracy, as well as a celebration of President Carter's life. And it's wonderful to see presidents of different parties there together, representing and showing the civility that is absolutely necessary for democracy to survive, right? That's how democracy survives.
And an important signal to send to countries around the world.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thanks so much, Dr. Crespino, for your insight and your perspective. As we continue to watch the motorcade progressing toward Maranatha, I want to check in with Fox 5's Rob DiRienzo, who's at the church waiting for the motorcade to arrive. Rob, give us your perspective from there.
Hey, Tom, we just got a big update on timing from a Carter Center spokesperson just a few moments ago. They say that the motorcade is going to be pulling up here just before 5 p.m. They're asking for complete silence from the media as the motorcade pulls in and this moment begins. It's such a big moment here at Maranatha Baptist Church. Again, we're expecting that very soon. And then after the motorcade pulls in, we're then going to see that 21 plane flyover, the missing man formation. That's when one of those planes will leave the formation to signify the loss of a member of this country's team. So that's what the latest guidance is. The service we're expecting to run about 45 minutes, but again, everything's starting to lock down here as we draw closer and closer to seeing that motorcade, seeing that hearse pull down this street for one final time to say goodbye to our 39th president. Back to you.
All right, thanks for that updated information, Rob, as we continue to watch the progress of the motorcade as it makes its way there to Rob's location. And as you heard, he's saying that we're getting some new information that we are expecting the motorcade to arrive just before 5 p.m. At that time, the family will also exit the vehicles ready to receive the remains of President Carter, and there will be a ceremony that will take place for the arrival of the remains there at Maranatha Baptist Church, just as we saw there at Lawson Airfield.
Honorary pallbearers will be escorted into position at the end of the corridor there, ready to escort the body into the church for the service that's set to begin. I want to bring in Fox 5 anchor Christine Spiro, leading our coverage from Plains for us this afternoon. Christine, we were talking to Eric Perry a couple minutes ago, saw some chairs set up on the line there. People determined to say their last goodbye to former and late President Carter. Some people may have even known him personally.
Yeah, we spoke to some of those folks in the crowd, just getting a feel for who's here. Are they people who came in from other parts of the state, in any case, to see the remains of the former president as they passed through? We spoke to one local family who knew the Carters, knew them well, called him Daddy Carter. And he was such a humble and kind person that for a lot of people, you didn't even have to meet him personally to feel some level of connection. They just resembled what this small town is about. We heard Jason Carter in his eulogy at the Washington Cathedral talking about, yes, he spent 4 years at the governor's mansion. He spent 4 years at the White House, but the other 92 years were right here in this small town of Plains. And I'm so struck as we drive through this area to see all the signs that say thank you. They say thank you, Mr. President, or they say thank you, Jimmy Carter, for the service that he gave to this country and how he served so honorably in that capacity as 39th President of the United States. We didn't hear a lot of any personal scandals like we sometimes hear with politicians of today when it came to the Carters. He was quite scandal-free in that sense, and it's because he moved in his faith in every way, shape, or form, from the decisions he made as President of the United States and governor and on down. Now, I wanted to just show you how this is an all-hands-on-deck affair. We're seeing multiple agencies, law enforcement lining these streets, not only Sumter County Sheriff's officials, but also the Americus Police Department here. We've seen multiple agencies getting ready to receive the president's remains in just this critical moment where this will be the final time that he travels through this stretch of downtown Plains before
All right, Fox 5's Christine Spiro.
At their family home.
Yeah, lost you for a second there, Christine, but now that we have you back, well, looks like her shot is jumping around a little bit. We'll get back to Christine in just a little bit as we watch the motorcade process toward that small community. I was thinking as Christine was talking, you know, about the small town feel of Plains and what Eric was saying about some of the folks there that knew President Carter on a personal level, knew him as Jimmy, and just thinking about how that small community would give birth to a man like that. You see the connection between the community and the man.
Yeah, it is so interesting that you see it come out in the issues that he would take on throughout his presidency, and then later in his humanitarian work, where he wrote about his experiences as a boy growing up in Plains. He said most of his playmates were African American, were black, and I would imagine that that kind of a perspective and experience brought so much to his work later with civil rights, appointing so many judges who came from those backgrounds, and women, people of color. Giving opportunities to people that he really saw as his equals at a time that not everybody necessarily shared that sentiment. But it is so good to hear those stories about how he grew up. It really helps you to understand who he is or who he became as a person.
Dr. Crespino of the Jimmy Carter Professor of History at Emory University, when you talk about the time in which President Carter ascended into politics, it wasn't a very pleasant time in terms of when you refer to segregation and the complicated past of our state. It was a lot to reconcile for a man who denounced it in his speech when he became governor of Georgia and then ascended into the presidency, but took the polar opposite route of many of his contemporaries in his own home state to a level that many admired about the man.
Yeah. That 1970 campaign was a hard-fought campaign. And 1970 was a year of intense reaction across the South because, you know, we think about school desegregation beginning in 1954 with Brown versus Board of Education, but it really took several decades. And 1970 was a year in which the Supreme Court, 1969, late 1969, the Supreme Court issued a decision that called for an immediate end to segregation in schools in the rural South. And so that set off a wave of kind of reactionary politics across the South. And President Carter was running in 1970 at that moment. Now, Jimmy Carter he had run in 66, and he had failed to gain traction as a candidate. He didn't make it to the runoff. And he ran really as a populist with the support of some pretty unsavory characters in 1970. But what was remarkable about that campaign, he won the Democratic primary, and then he won the general election. And when he gave that inaugural speech in 1971, it really shocked a lot of people. Yeah, it did. Because he came out of South Georgia. He had run with the support of George Wallace, you know, in the Democratic primary against Carl Sanders. And when he said the time for racial discrimination is over, that made news in Georgia and across the country. It's why Time magazine put him on the cover. That was a big deal to be on Time magazine's cover in 1971. And it announced him as kind of the leading figure in this wave of New South governors, they were called. progressive Democratic governors. Well, actually, a progressive Republican governor in Virginia, but in Arkansas and Virginia, in South Carolina, who were turning the page on the politics of race and were building biracial coalitions to advance more progressive causes. And that's what President Carter did as governor, appointing a historic number of African Americans to important positions. And paving the way there.
Yeah, it really is fascinating when you talk about the fact that he came from the South, from a state where Jim Crow and things had gone on, for him to make such a controversial at the time statement. Let's put a pin in that, Dr. Crispino. Thank you for that perspective, and get back out to Fox 5's Eric Perry, who is in downtown Plains. Eric, we understand the motorcade, as we've been watching it from the air, is making its way closer to your location now.
Yeah, Courtney, they just said 12 minutes away from here, 280 going through downtown Plains. And you can see that the officials are starting to get into a position. They are coming from all over. In fact, if you can, my friend over there to the right there, that police officer right there, he is from the city of Decatur, right outside of our, not too far from where we're located there. Came all the way down here to be a part of this. This is a goulash of different law enforcement agencies. I've seen Cherokee County, I've seen Fulton County, and what they're going to do is they're going to line in a symmetrical order across from here as the hearse makes its way to Maranatha Baptist Church there. My photographer is showing you just the amount of people that have come out. Of course, now as we are getting closer to the time where the hearse and the family expected to go through here, they're going to take a left up at the next street over, go by his high school, where they'll pause for a brief moment, Plains High School, and then they'll make their way to Maranatha Baptist Church. Shortly after that, around 5:15, we will expect that flyover to happen there. Because of the scheduling, it was supposed to initially happen afterwards, but because they want to make sure that the light is out, and then that's when they will go in. And then afterwards, we will see the reverse of that. They will come out and then get out of their cars and walk behind the hearse here through Plains, Georgia. This is the town. I've been talking with people. I've said it earlier. I've talked a lot about this town here since the passing of the president, since I've been back here in Atlanta. But growing up here, passing by the Carter Center every day on the way to school, his name across the country, across the state, means so much. So to be here and to see the city, the small town that he loved so much, and the town also loved him, they tell me they want to make sure that they give him the send-off that he wanted. A little fact, 1986 is when they started planning the state funeral. They sat down with the former president and his wife, Rosalind. Every music, every detail, everything was done and selected by the Carters. They wanted the first service to be there at the Carter Center, but they wanted their final goodbye, their final send-off to be a walk through this hometown of Plains, Georgia. I've talked to so many people on camera, off camera, all of them having a personal connection with the former president. Each and every one of them had a personal relationship with them, and really getting the sense that he wasn't just a former president here. He wasn't just a governor. He was just their neighbor. He was Mr. Jimmy. He was someone who they felt they could go to him about anything, and that he was one of their friends here as well. But again, we are probably around 10 minutes now from the hearse coming through 280 from Preston and from the Air Force Base there, taking a left, going to place that he loved so much. He spent so much time there, Maranatha Baptist Church, for a private, intimate ceremony, the way that he wanted it to happen. Courtney, Tom.
All right, Eric, great perspective from the line there, waiting for the hearse of the late President Jimmy Carter to pass through. Speaking of Maranatha, he taught well over 1,000 times there, dating way back to his Naval Academy years, and saying, to me, faith is not just a noun, but also a verb. You gotta walk the walk, and nobody did it more than President Jimmy Carter. Yeah, that was something I saw displayed at the Carter Center the other night when I had an opportunity to go inside, when people were able to pay their respects while he was lying in repose.
at the Carter Center, and I was struck by how much it was woven in the exhibits that you see, in the first few things that you see on the walls as you walk into the Carter Center. It's quotes about his faith. It's something that it just seems as not easy to separate from the man Jimmy Carter is, how important his faith was to him. It's something that also came up during the National Cathedral service when the son of Walter Mondale read that eulogy that was written by his late father. And he talked about the importance of President Carter's faith, that it was something that really they shared, that he was a Methodist, and that was something they held in common and really helped them to work together as president and vice president. President
Carter elevating the role of vice president, a role that wasn't as significant before Walter Mondale. The two working very closely together on so many issues, making him a prominent part of President Carter's presidency, teeing him up, if you will, for his failed run against Ronald Reagan, Walter Mondale, that is. Let's get out to Fox 5's Christine Spiro, who is along the line waiting for the hearse to pass through. Christine, Courtney and I were talking a second ago while we lost your shot about Plains, Georgia itself. You're there in the elements of where this man grew up and became who he is. Plains giving birth to Jimmy Carter in so many ways. It is a wholesome town where everybody knows your name.
Yeah, it sure is, Tom and Courtney. And I think it's safe to say this is probably the place where he truly found his faith. You guys were talking with our guest in studio about his run for governor, and that first run being a failed run. And I heard Jimmy Carter talk in an interview about how that loss really made him disillusioned in his faith. He couldn't understand why the electorate at that time would choose someone who was racist to run for governor. He felt like he represented the future and represented the direction that the state of Georgia should move in. And he says it was his sister Ruth, who was an evangelist, who was the one who said to him that this is a setback, but it should not be considered a failure, that he should use it as a stepping stone to not only find inner strength, but also to find his faith. And he used that time after speaking with his sister Ruth to really start ministering to others about Christ. And he said it was during that time that renewed his own personal faith in Christ and really set the stage for him to eventually successfully run for governor again the second time. So we have also seen in every part of the ceremonial nature when his remains are taken to Special Air Mission 39, when there is services in the Washington Cathedral or at the Carter Center, that hymns are such a critical part of the services. And that's very deliberate, of course, because we know Jimmy to be such a strong man of faith. We've heard Amazing Grace multiple times. We'll hear Old Rugged Cross when the private service takes place at Maranatha Baptist Church. Really classic and traditional hymns that really sets the tone of how Jimmy Carter obviously wanted to be remembered, Tom and Courtney.
Christine, can we just talk about the weather for a second, too? I mean, there you are standing there on what is a crisp but beautiful day in Plains, Georgia. The president touched down in Washington, D.C. right after a snowstorm on a beautiful blanketed tarmac at Andrews Air Reserve Base there. Joint Base Andrews, I should say. And here we are staring down a winter storm that's about to hit our area tomorrow. But the president, his final day will be on what is a beautiful day there in Plains, Georgia.
I think the Carter family, the dozens of them that have trekked each part of this 10-day process, they're going to be relieved, really, when they come out of their vehicles and walk the streets of Plains to see just how beautiful it is out here today. It will be the exact opposite of what they've been experiencing for sure in Washington, D.C. these last couple days. Yes, Tom, it started off very chilly this morning. We thought it was going to stay that way, but when that sun hung in the sky today, it really just took the chill off of the air, and it is really a gorgeous day today, and a fitting backdrop to bury the patriarch of the family, and see the lines and lines, 4 or 5 deep now, of people on either side of the streets say goodbye to their father here in Plains, Georgia.
Yeah, he deserves it. After 100 years of a life well lived, with the sun shining, it's a great day to send him home for a final time. And we're about to see that as that motorcade continues to make its way closer. Christine, thank you so much for your perspective there in downtown Plains. As we look here at the group that is gathered here of military members who are ready to receive the motorcade as it arrives at Maranatha Baptist Church. We're going to see a lot more in terms of the ceremony that we've seen throughout the day that is planned when it arrives.
The military is such an important part of these proceedings over the past several days, especially at the U.S. Navy Memorial up in Washington, D.C. President Carter having attended the Naval Academy and then his Navy service aboard submarines. Dr. Crespino, an important part of his presidency as well. He really revered the United States military at the time, shoring up a lot of the infrastructure of the military that had fallen in disrepair. So the military remembrances here that we've seen were critical to the planning of this service.
That's right. I mean, he was very proud of his service in the Navy, and he was a very distinguished naval officer before he just his father passed away, and he decided to return to the Plains. But one of the things that President Carter, I'd heard him say on a number of occasions that he was most proud of as president, is that he kept the peace. And he kept the peace at a time late in the Cold War, in part by reestablishing a strong military. And he did that certainly by 1979 and 1980, a military that had been demoralized in the Vietnam War years, given how long that struggle had been and the controversies over the draft. But President Carter did do a lot to help strengthen the military. He doesn't get a lot of credit for it. We usually associate that with the Reagan presidency, but it's one of those things that actually began under President Carter.
How difficult do you think it will be to, now that the president has passed, to keep this legacy alive, even though he wasn't directly involved necessarily in the Carter Center anymore, especially in the last couple of years? We knew he was here. Okay, he was here on the planet with us, and so that undoubtedly added some kind of motivation to the staff, your departments at Emory University. How difficult will that be to keep that legacy alive and all of the work that he put into the Carter Center relevant?
Well, there's no doubt that President Carter's personal presence in the work that the Carter Center did, and being on campus at Emory University was absolutely transformative. He's such a charismatic figure and such a hard-working figure. But President Carter has been anticipating this day for many years, and he's built up an enormous infrastructure there at the Carter Center. You heard about it today in the eulogy that his grandson Jason Carter gave about the work that the Carter Center is doing around the globe. How many employees the Carter Center has that are not in Atlanta, that are not at the Carter Center, but are working in the field around the globe on Carter Center projects. So it won't be as easy, but I think that there are many hardworking, good people at the Carter Center and at Emory University. I can guarantee you that we're going to be working hard to continue his legacy and to build on all that he did for the university, for Atlanta, and for the world.
Yeah, something that our Russ Spencer shared, interview that was done a number of years ago that aired on C-SPAN, where President Carter was sharing a funny story about how the Carter Center staff and leadership wouldn't refer to his impending death
That's right.
in that direct of a way. They would say he'd be in a diminished capacity.
Yeah, but people have been planning for this for a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, it's inevitable for us all.
And are certain that he'll be watching.
Yeah, that's
Make
right.
sure everybody's
No
on
doubt.
task.
That's right. That's right.
He did so many important things through the Carter Initiative, the Carter Presidential Library, really around the world with democracy and Habitat for Humanity and eradicating afflictions of poorer countries around the world, voting, legitimacy. It ran the gamut. This was a man who, from his earliest years in the Naval Academy and even before that, with his involvement at the very church that you're looking at today, gave of himself, first as a community member, a pastor, a husband, a president, and a man who was involved globally in his post-presidency.
Yeah, you're looking at live pictures coming to us from Plains. This is Maranatha Baptist Church, the Carter's longtime home church. As we see the motorcade as it's making its way closer and closer now to downtown Plains. That's the location where our Eric Perry has been standing by, and we've seen people lining the roads awaiting the arrival of this motorcade, along with members of the Carter family. Of course, the hearse is there, accompanied by members of law enforcement and the military that have been accompanying this procession. As it's been a long day for the members of the Carter family that are part of this, because this started out this morning early in Washington, D.C. with the beautiful service that we saw at the National Cathedral. And with such care, reverence, and ceremony, the remains have made their way now into Plains, almost as it approaches downtown Plains. But again, there will be a private service held there for the members of the Carter family to be able to have their chance to say a more private and quiet goodbye to the man they knew and loved.
President Biden welcoming the family on Tuesday when the late president's remains were brought up to Washington, D.C. The family staying at Blair House and enjoying the company of the current president of the United States. A lot of memories, I'm sure, came back for that family. Amy Carter, having resided in the White House with her parents at a very young age. The country kind of watched her grow up back in the 1970s. I remember that. Don't want to date myself, but I'm a Carter baby, and remembering those times, and what were some pretty tumultuous years for this country, economically, geopolitically, fuel shortages. I mean, this man had a lot on his plate when he occupied the White House. Yeah,
the Iranian hostage crisis, which weighed so heavily on him, and with them not being released until the final day of his presidency, I'm sure something that he was very proud of, despite it being something that probably contributed heavily to his re-election defeat. But it just, for me, really showed how important that issue was to him, that he would not travel, he wouldn't leave Washington, D.C. until the hostages were released. But again, you're seeing there that there are members of the military and the band assembled there as they await the arrival of the motorcade at Maranatha Baptist Church.
In what will be a significantly smaller, more humble ceremony that we saw at the National Cathedral this morning. That service at the National Cathedral, sort of a rite of passage for former presidents who pass away. The motorcade now getting closer to Plains and that downtown area where our reporters have been along the line. But this is how President Carter would want his final service, final remembrance to be among his family, his closest friends, and the parishioners there at Maranatha. As you can see, the folks lined up there waiting to greet the motorcade and the hearse carrying the remains of the late president.
Yeah, the shot has been freezing momentarily at times, but we are getting a look now as it comes in, and just beautiful to see people with American flags. You see people young and old, kids, I'm sure entire families are there together, watching this. When I was younger, I'm not going to say how old, since we're not dating ourselves right now.
You're not a Carter baby?
No, I'm not. But being from Southern California, my family didn't live far from the Reagan Library. And when he died, my mom thought it would be so important for me and my 3 siblings to go out and stand on the highway overpass and watch his motorcade pass by. And that is something that I'll always remember. There was so much patriotism in that moment. And especially for a young person or even a high school student to witness it, it's something that brings history to life. I mean, this is history that these people are now a part of.
Yeah, I was struck, actually, now that you mention it, when you were covering the service there at the Carter Center for us, seeing the parents with their children coming in to honor the late president there as he lied in repose at the Carter Center on what was a really blustery day.
It was so cold.
It was so cold, and yet those kids stood out there with their parents who had lived through the Carter presidency because they wanted them to witness history. So an important teaching moment as well.
Yeah, no better way to learn history than to experience it and take part in it yourself. But yeah, just it's so beautiful to see how many people turned out today there in Plains for this aspect of it.
And so these are live pictures along the route where well-wishers are awaiting the hearse of former President Jimmy Carter. We saw some vehicles roll through there a couple of moments ago. They are lining right through downtown Plains as the family and the remains of the late president make its way to Maranatha Baptist Church. See some more vehicles approaching. I don't know if we have audio, but it'd be nice to listen in for a sec. Live pictures from Plains, Georgia. We saw the hearse of the late President Jimmy Carter returning home one last time as community members and well-wishers, both old and young, adult and child, gather there to say one final goodbye as the president arrives at Maranatha Baptist Church, which we understand isn't too far from that route. Dr. Crespino of Emory University who knows or knew President Carter very well, taught alongside him. You know Plains pretty well. This town is going to change now. It's now part of history. It will become a memorial site officially for President Carter, be protected federally. But it'll be a destination now, in addition to the Carter Center, where you can go learn about former President Carter and his wife Rosalind.
That's right. The National Park Service has established several sites there in Archery, where President Carter grew up, and it's a boyhood home, and has preserved that farm site as it's a wonderful kind of museum to kind of rural life in the 1920s and 30s.
Wow.
And so you get a sense about how Southern agriculture worked, about how race relations worked between landowners and sharecroppers. You know, there's a lot of interesting things there. There's the old schoolhouse where President Carter attended the school, and now, you know, his gravesite and his home will be part of that tour of commemoration.
Almost reminds you of a Mount Vernon of sorts, but our own southern Mount Vernon, where you can go and learn about not only his life, but a different era that's a bygone era. As we're seeing the motorcade now arriving at the church, we've been told that members of the media there, so our Rob D'Arienzo is there on the ground, but we've been told that they want complete silence for this arrival as the remains are removed from the hearse and the family members make their way to welcome them.
Yeah, they're coming off that shuttle that transported them from the airfield to Maranatha through town. What a sight that must have been for the family, and a reassuring one at that of the gratitude of that community welcoming their late patriarch back to that small town that he's called home since birth, waiting for the military delegation there to take his casket out of the hearse. And when that happens, we'll listen into that. Dr. Crespino, it was also worth mentioning that that the Carters didn't sort of use the fruits of the presidency and the writings of his book and the royalties that came out of that to live lavishly on, you know, islands or in high-profile places or homes for that matter. They lived in the same home for so many years, same furniture and chairs, and that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, it is remarkable. It's a very modest ranch-style home there in Plains. There were no great renovations after the presidency. And President Carter would always be very clear about the fact that he needed to write books to make a living, and of course he worked tremendously hard to raise money to secure an endowment for the Carter Center, so that he continued to work and to do his work around the world, and so that the work would continue after his time. So that's what all of his resources and time and energy was spent in building, and it certainly wasn't on you know, homes or vacations or you know, other luxuries.
Yeah, and the church that they were members of, the Maranatha Baptist Church, which we're looking at right now, is also a small and humble church.
Yeah.
And when President Carter would teach Sunday school there, it attracted hundreds of thousands of visitors over the years. But we heard from one church member that today the church only has about 30 members.
Yeah.
It's a very small church. You've been there before, you've taken students there. What was that like, being there to hear from him, but also just paint the picture of what kind of a church this is?
It's a very small sanctuary. There's a back room off of the sanctuary. Whenever we went, there would be people lined up in darkness waiting to get in. So there you see the sanctuary there. That's the main sanctuary. Off to the right there, just off screen, there's a doorway that leads to a back room where there would be chairs set up there, where the overflow crowd would sit there and watch President Carter teach Sunday school on a closed circuit television there. But always the pews would be packed, and people would be waiting for hours to get into to hear President Carter.
How about that for a familiar sight, looking inside the church where we've seen President Carter preaching, sitting, and sometimes in his later years talking to the congregation there. We're going to quiet down here because we understand that there is going to be a flyover at any moment now to honor the former president, and then after that his remains will be brought into the church.
They've been asking for silence there on the ground, and it does appear to be very silent, very still, as we await the flyover, in addition to several other events that will take place before the family and the casket make their way inside the church for that private ceremony. So any minute now, we will give you a look as we turn our perspective towards the sky and see that flyover.
This is from north to south, we understand. It's a 21 plane formation. Missing man aircraft will pull out of that formation, like the 21 gun salutes that have been happening throughout these proceedings. The family waiting there for the remains to be taken out of the hearse and that flyover to happen. That's going to be quite a sight to see those jets pass over, and then the rising of the one plane, the missing man aircraft, to pull out of the formation in honor of the 39th president.
Honoring not only his service to our nation as president, but also his military service, having served in the Navy. And there were so many things that we saw throughout these 9 days that paid tribute, paid homage to his military service in so many different ways. So this will be yet another one.
And so this family reconciling a lot of emotions today for a man that had such a significant impact on the entire world in so many ways and on so many levels, from small town America to a player on the world stage and the leader of the free world. And now that family gathers to mourn the loss of somebody who was very personally connected to them, while allowing the country to look in, as we are tonight, to also say our farewells and to thank this man for his decades, his century of service.
Yeah. Serving in so many ways as a humanitarian, just clearly having touched so many lives here in Georgia, especially there in Plains. And here it is. Let's listen.
The 21 plane formation flying over Maranatha Baptist Church in Plains, Georgia, honoring the late President Jimmy Carter on this solemn day when the country pays its respects and says its final goodbye in what will be a private service for the family of the former president, with family members and local community members and parishioners of the church as the president is set to be laid to rest next to Rosalind Carter in their beloved community.
Yeah, that was a beautiful and symbolic gesture to honor the former president. You saw those planes flying together and then leave a space in the formation in representation of a person who is no longer with us, perhaps still with us in spirit, but no longer with us in body. And it was just a very respectful way to honor him as we prepare for the final service to mark the end of 9 days of remembrances and tributes that have comprised this funeral for a former president and a native man from Plains who's being honored now in such a personal way. As we see several people approaching now the hearse, members of the Carter family have been gathered there awaiting the arrival. And you can see also members of the military. There will be several songs that the military band will perform. Little ceremony will be held here before they make their way inside the church at Maranatha Baptist.
Dr. Crispino, I'm curious, the Carter family, I don't know how close they are, the children, and of course we know Jason Carter is involved in politics or has aspirations. Will they also play a part in the legacy and the teachings and the operations of the Carter Center? How involved is the family?
Well, Jason Carter is the chair of the board, and there are other family members involved in the work, and so they no doubt will continue to play an important role in carrying on the president's legacy through the Carter Center. They were a very tight-knit family, and I think Jason described today the refrigerator in the Carter's home there in Plains that was covered with pictures, blanketed with pictures of grandchildren and great-grandchildren and family members. So they would often, I know they often gather as a large group of family, have regular family reunions, and so I think that it is a very tight-knit group that will no doubt continue to play an important role in the carrying out the legacy that President Carter established.
Yeah, as we're watching so many of these family members make their way now inside the church, and this perspective also gives us another idea of just how small this church is. I would imagine it's going to be pretty packed for this service. Dr. Crispino, you having been there.
Yeah, I see about 12 rows there.
Yeah, no, that's a great shot.
It's pretty small.
A great shot. It really gives you a sense of just how intimate the sanctuary is. It's very small.
Yeah, we're getting our first glimpse at the casket now as it emerges from the hearse.
I believe that's Jason Carter, maybe I'm mistaken, on the right side of the screen there.
Yeah,
it does look like
far
him.
right.
Yeah, it does look like him.
The late president sort of served as a role model for him. I mean, Jason was sort of the connection to information about the president in the last couple of years, and the closest we had to President Carter in many ways.
Yeah,
he's kind of emerged as the figure of the family.
That's right. Jason served in the state senate here in Georgia. He's a lawyer here in Atlanta. Ran for governor unsuccessfully, but is continuing on his grandfather's legacy as the chair of the Carter Center board, and plays a big, prominent role here in Atlanta. Spoken at several national Democratic conventions. Often, in the last case, it was kind of speaking on his grandfather's behalf. So yes, he is the oldest of the grandchildren and has played the most prominent public role in carrying on President Carter's.
Perhaps we haven't heard the last from him politically either.
One suspects.
The pallbearers now will remove the casket from the hearse, and you can see the ceremonial troops have been moving into position. They will present colors and render honors, present arms. There will be a little bit of a ceremony here in just a few moments before they make their way inside. let's actually take a listen in to what's happening there now.
How firm a foundation from the 282nd Army Band from Fort Jackson, South Carolina, being played as the congregants there, family members, await for the remains of former President Jimmy Carter, who presumably is in the narthex of the church right now. We're going to be listening in to the remembrance ceremony here as soon as it gets started. Dr. Crespino, I was somewhat amused, perhaps not the right word to use, but Hail to the Chief has been played over and over again throughout these 8 or 9 days. It's not a song that Carter was necessarily fond of when he was president, when he entered a room.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, when he came into the context of the aftermath of the Nixon presidency, and which was kind of characterized as the imperial presidency. You know, as we've talked about before, the controversies around Watergate. Famously, there was, he took a number of steps early as president to kind of upend the sense of the imperial presidency. He sold off the presidential yacht. There actually was a presidential yacht that President Nixon liked to commonly use, and famously he walked behind the presidential limousine, as you noted earlier, when he went from the Capitol back to the White House after the inauguration. And there was a time when he didn't like it for the Hail to the Chief to be played when he came into the room, because it had these kinds of imperial trappings, these kind of And he was a man of the people. He wanted to lead a much more kind of small d democratic administration that was closely connected to the people.
It just seems like the humility is something that was a common theme of at least the intentions of his presidency and his humanitarian work. You know, seeing he and Rosalind out building homes for Habitat for Humanity and swinging the hammer in their 90s. I mean,
not photo ops, by the way. I mean,
Right.
they hang out and build these houses.
Yeah, that's right.
what do you think? You know, throughout all of these several days of remembrances, what do you think he would want us to take away from this, from the musical selections and the places that the motorcade has traveled? What do you think he would have wanted us to talk about right now as a reflection?
Well, I think he would, you know, it's important for him that this long week of remembrances ends here at Maranatha Baptist Church, which has been his spiritual home for so many years, and that this is it's important that this is the last place that he be remembered. It is his home. It's the place that was most dear to him, that he returned to every week to lead the congregation in teaching and in songs. And you know, the songs have been so beautiful, and I know they're carefully chosen, just as you know, Mrs. Carter carefully chose her wonderful, you know, slate of hymns and other songs, and I'm sure that he picked these particular hymns, you know, years earlier.
Yeah,
and that
well,
this had been
actually,
planned.
we're told that Mrs. Carter chose all of the musical selections we've been hearing.
Yeah.
Which is, again, I think a testament to their 77 years of marriage. And she probably knew which songs he would have wanted better than him.
Yeah, that's right. One interview I heard this week, which is interesting, is someone asked President Carter, "Is there anything you can't do?" And he would say, "I can't really sing." So it may be that Rosalind picked the hymns.
She was really the wind beneath his wings in so many ways. Many people say that there wouldn't be a President Carter if it weren't for Rosalind Carter. She was more of a political tactician, perhaps even more than him, than many people realized in the inner workings once they got inside the White House. I'm not sure it reached the level of a Nancy Reagan, but she got the last word when they hit the pillows at night.
Yeah, I mean, and she took a really public role, you know, and you know, when it wasn't any kind of softball issue that she, you know, pursued. I mean, it was putting on the map the issue of mental health, and that was enormous. You know, that was not well known at the time, and so to take that as her cause as First Lady was really notable and really important. For people, you know, who study and work on public health and issues of mental health, and so she was an extraordinary First Lady, and over 70 years of marriage together, just remarkable.
Yeah, thanks so much for that perspective, Dr. Crispino. We're going to listen in now as inside the church, it looks like the ceremony is beginning to take place. Let's listen.
Please be seated. Peace. Salam. Shalom. We are here to honor the life of President Jimmy Carter, a faithful partner to Rosalind, un padre orgulloso, a proud parent to Jack, Jeff, Chip, and Amy, a gifted poet, a neighbor in this tiny, peanut-loving town of Plains, and a global peacemaker. In this sacred space, filled with red velvety pews and feet planted on green carpet, we are united in our humanity, in our need to love and be loved. Though our stories and proximity differ, we are here because we have been impacted by the earthly presence of this remarkable human, a leader who used his power not for selfish gain, but humbly in service of all. Would you please join me in prayer? Creator, we are gathered here today with souls stripped naked with grief and silent tears stuffed with memories trickling down our faces. We know death is inescapable, and yet, when it arrives, we often are ill-prepared for the weight of its reality upon our chest. May we be attentive, tender, and protective of one another, as collectively we have been draped in a blanket of sorrow. Exhaustion has been an unwelcome companion for days. Our eyesight is blurry, our emotions frail, and our steps feel unsteady. May we ease one another's pain with tangible, skin-to-skin love, like fingers interlocking, arms wrapped in a warm embrace, and kisses on foreheads. When we lock eyes with one another, may only the language of comfort be exchanged. On our darkest days, help us to trust that hope is on the horizon. May we extend grace to ourselves as we navigate the days ahead. And when our eyes readjust and our steps feel more secure, let us again join in the work set before us, for we have been called to action. We will reap what we sow. The seeds of equality, justice, humility, and freedom were planted by President Carter and Rosalind, and they are now ours to tend, here in Plains, in the United States, and in the world. May tyrants tremble as the soil beneath them is disrupted, for our hands are on the plows. May we loosen our grip, God, on the labels that we place on ourselves and on others, so that we may see the sacred worth of each and every human, following the example set before us by Jesus and by Jimmy Carter. Whether we are clad in a hijab or kippah, wearing a cross or bindi, we are each a divine masterpiece. The Lord does not look at the outer appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. So, Spirit, awaken us to the breathtaking mystery of your indescribable and uncontainable love. Love known by many names. Love that longs to be at home within us. As Mr. Jimmy would pray, may our lives be meaningful in the enhancement of the lives of our fellow human beings, and may we never grow weary of waging peace. Amen.
For He has showed you, oh man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God.
Praise the Lord, everybody.
Praise the Lord.
Somebody say hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
And wake the church up. It's been a long ride. We've taken JC all across the country to D.C. in the cold, in the wind, on Air Force One, to the Capitol, and back here to Plains at home. Amen? Amen. Would you pray with me first, please, before I speak over my friend? Father, in the name of Jesus, Lord, I just thank you for this opportunity. I pray, God, that your will be done today. Hide me behind the cross, God. May the people be blessed by you and not impressed by me. Comfort this family, God. Comfort all the friends, all the staff, all those that's played a part in this great man's life. Comfort the family more than anything. Comfort Maranatha Baptist Church, God. Give them hope. Allow them to stand on their faith. Comfort those that are standing alongside the roads waving flags and honor your great servant. Father, we give you the credit and all the glory. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Amen. Last Sunday, our God called the Sunday school teacher home. This ex-president, the governor, the senator, Jason Pop, he called him home on Sunday. Today we honor the life and legacy of Jimmy Carter, a man of faith, courage, and conviction. From his humble beginning as a Georgia farmer to his incredible accomplishments as commander-in-chief, President Carter embodied the ideas of a life of service. In 1979, America was divided. President Carter gave a speech, Crisis in Confidence. Well, we had a confidence problem in our government leaders. He challenged America to recover the sense of unity and purpose that binds people together. In true Jimmy Carter fashion, I believe it's only fitting that his transition into heaven coincides with a pivotal transition taking place in our nation today. Right before we swear in Congress, right before we have an inauguration, and right before we get an opportunity to pick a new government. President Carter is still giving us a lesson today on faith and hope while the world picks new leaders. President Carter has given us a lesson today on faith and hope to be the guardrails of our democracy, the guardrails of everything that we do. Whether it's building houses, whether it's helping the homeless, whether it's feeding the poor, whether it's giving clean water to those in Africa, faith and hope should be our guardrails to everything that we do. The greatest forces of human spirit, faith and hope, often seems so elusive from all of us. We see all in the media all the different things that takes place, and we wonder whether or not we have faith and hope and whether it's going to bring change about in our nation. President Carter reminds us today that we can make a difference, that we can stand forward and make change in our nation and around the world. As I think about President Carter's unwavering commitment to serve our nation with faith and hope, his covenant to spread joy is a testament to his character and his leadership. He advocated for justice, fairness, and equality for all people, regardless of race, creed, or gender in America, all around the world. He championed civil rights, worked tirelessly to end discrimination and protect the environment, and urged us to lend a hand. He knew what it was like to live in public housing, because after he got out of the military, right down the road here, he ended up living in public housing. And he was grateful to a nation that gave him a place called home. And later on, those same circumstances, years later, he had very, very different circumstances where he ended up back in public housing called the White House. He would find himself in public housing once again. He was a servant leader who was called by two books. When I think about President Carter, taking his left hand and raising his right hand and making a covenant with his God that he would serve this nation and serve it well, he was called by two books. There's a big book standing outside of the Carter Center, his office in Atlanta. This big, massive book, Curtis. It's so big you wouldn't want to pick it up. But it's a big book, and it talks about the duties of the president, Jack. This book tells him when to appoint the Supreme Court justice. This book tells him about carrying out the duties of a president. This book tells him all the things that he should do as the president of the United States. But there's another book. The book that he put his left hand on when he was a state senator. The book that he put his left hand on when he was an officer in the Navy. Jan, the book that he put his hand on when he became governor of Georgia. That same book that he put his hand on when he became the president of the United States. That book that taught him about faith and hope. That book taught him about loving your neighbor. That book that taught him about there should be no discrimination in our country. That book that allowed him to go around and talk about, I can build homes in America for the poor. Why? Because my Savior has already built a mansion for me. That book that gave him hope when he fell. That book that gave him hope when he had cancer. That book that taught him about the love, taught him about Genesis, taught him about Exodus, taught him about Revelations, but more importantly, taught him about Galatians. Galatians chapter 5, verse 22 to 23. And it reads this. Congressman Bishop, it says, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Against such there is no law. And some of you will catch this later on when you go up to the Carter Center and look at the big presidential book. If you have no faith, you have no hope, you have no love, you have no joy, and you don't have the fruits of the Spirit, against it there is no law. You see, when President Carter took office, the outlook for the nation was deeply divided by strife and sharp political division. And it sounds like we're there today. Amen. Where we need the fruits of the Spirit, where we need love, where we need joy, where we need long suffering, where we need peace, temperance, where we need meekness and faith, because against this, there can be no law for our nation. If we have not any of these fruits of the Spirit, then maybe we should just take off the words, in God we trust, on our currency. But Jimmy Carter, in the years since, America has often reflected on the turmoil of the era, which many focusing on perceived a lack of a moral compass in the political arena. A lot of the experts will judge President Carter on the big book, his political accomplishments, whether he failed or whether he did some great things. And all the commentators are talking on all the networks, talking about the big book. But to know the man, you got to know the book. To know the man, you got to know the book that made the man. You got to know the fact that he had a young lady in his life by the name of Rachel Clark. Rachel Clark, a black woman who worked on his daddy's farm. walk with him and take him fishing. A black woman who would tell him about the Lord Jesus Christ. A black woman who would tell him what it means to be a man and love your wife. In order to know about Jimmy Carter, you have to know about Bishop William Decker Bonner, an AME bishop who would stand outside his father's farm by the fence and talk to his father about the book so that he can teach those that's working on the farm about the book. And President Carter sat with me one day and he told me, this bishop taught me about Jesus Christ. I remember when he put us in the car, got the Secret Service together, and he lined them up outside the gate, and he called me on the phone. He said, Tony, where are you? Jack, I told him I was 10 minutes out. In reality, I was 15 minutes out. He said, hurry up and get here. I pushed the gas pedal a little harder through Sumter County in Americas. And when I got there, we got in this caravan and we drove to Archery, Georgia. We pulled on from the side of the road to an unmarked grave site. The 39th President Amy was there. The aides are pushing him in a wheelchair, Secret Service behind. I'm scared to death because some of these grave sites look like you can fall right in. Jason, I'm an old city boy. I saw the ant hills and all the things. I was afraid. But he was pushing and saying, look, Tony, over here, this is Bishop William Decker Johnson. That's him, made a difference in my life. Over here is a father who fought in World War I. A black man made a difference in this nation. Over here is his son who fought in World War II, who made a difference in this nation. Walking around, I couldn't understand and wrap my mind around why would this man, a southerner from Georgia, take this black man, his pastor, and teach him about the history of them, those that made a difference. It didn't dawn on me, Jason, until I understood that it was all about the fruits of the spirits, about him giving me this passage through the book, because in the book, even black people knew about the Savior. Jimmy Carter wanted to make sure that his pastor knew that they made a difference in his life, and it took him all the way to the White House. Yes, what will our future generation think when they reflect upon our nation today? What will our children think? I often wonder what would the world be like for my 7-year-old daughter. I often wonder what the world would be like after all this celebration is over. Will we pick up the baton? Or will we just clap our hands and take pictures and say we were there, instead of moving it forward? Picking up the fruits of the spirits from the book, not the presidential book, but the book that became the foundations of his life. The book that made Jimmy Carter who he is today. The book where he sat here in Sunday school and taught Sunday school, and every time he finished, he challenged us. Go out and do something for somebody else. Go build a fence. Go cook a cake. Do something for somebody else. It breaks my heart to know that my friend is gone. But I hear the echo of his voice every Saturday asking me the 4 questions. Tony, where have you been? What have you done? Who have you helped? And how can I help you help them? You got to understand, George, that sometimes he was weak and struggling. Instead of asking 4 questions, he would just say, where have you been? There was times he would ask What's going on in Maranatha? Who's sick? Who can I call? Give me their number. And members, some are sitting here today, will get a call from Jimmy Carter. Why? Because reading the book, JC had an encounter with JC. And JC became everything like his God, everything like his Savior. We're here today because of the book. We're here today because what the book did for Jimmy Carter. We're here today, all of us, black, white, brown, others, all around the world. I remember when he told me, Tony, I need you to get the black churches and the white churches in Plain to worship together. Well, President Carter, I'm trying. I can tell him today that he was able to get blacks, white, browns, and others all around the world to sing Amazing Grace. Let there be peace on earth. I can tell him today, in this book, Why Not Your Best, Admiral Rickover asked him 2 questions. One of the questions were, what rank did you graduate in? And he asked him another question. He said, why not? Did you give your best? Today, I can tell the Admiral that JC gave his best to the world, even in his latter days. Today, I can tell the Admiral that JC gave his best all the way to his dying moments. Today, I can tell the Admiral that I saw seamen at every Air Force base we went to with the wind blowing and a seaman holding a flag, and the flag is fully extended, and he's holding the presidential flag, and it's flapping like crazy. He's wearing about $1.50, and every now and then that flag would lift him up, and he would anchor it back down. He would lift him up, and he would anchor it back down. He was freezing, he was cold, but he gave us his best. And then when we get to D.C., there was another seaman holding the flag. Wind was blowing, it was cold, and he was holding this cover falls off, and he's holding the presidential flag, and he's giving his best. I know we had a lot of ceremonies, and I know we walked down to the Capitol. I know we did all the things, but I would imagine the day that President Carter would have stopped and walked over to those seamen and said, thank you for giving me your best. I imagined the last Sunday when God opened up the doors and said, Jimmy, come on home, that there was an angel in the back ringing the bell 39 times. I imagine that those who've been on a detail planning his demise start running because they went before he did. I imagine that some of his friends that helped build the Carter Center come running to the gate because the angel was ringing the bell 39 times. I imagine that his mom got up and said, I hear the bell, I hear the bell. I imagine his bride start pushing her way to the gate, telling people, move out of my way so I can get some sugar from my Jimmy before he start building homes up here. You see, all along the way, Jimmy Carter gave us his best. And there's something I want to point out to you, because the only way you can see it, you have to stop and look. We got here today when the pallbearers was carrying his body. Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, all along the way, soldiers standing on the post, saluting him as they go by. Washington, D.C., at the Capitol, all of them giving Jimmy Carter their best. I had to look up some of the nation's mottos about our soldiers. The U.S. Army, this will we defend. The U.S. Marine Corps, Semper Fi, always faithful. The U.S. Air Force, aim high, fly, fight, and win. The U.S. Coast Guard, Semper Paratus, always ready. But there's a phrase inscribed above the chapel doors of the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis. Non-CB said, Patre I. It's Latin for not self, but country. I imagine that JC knew about that phrase, that every step along the way, when he came back to take over his father's farm, it still rang in his heart. Not self, but for country. That's what every one of our soldiers have done. Every one of the Secret Service detail for 40 plus years, keeping them safe. Not self, but for country. Every one of the A's that extended his life while he was in hospice, not self, but for country. Every worker at the Carter Center, not self, but for country. The challenge of you today, can you embrace that? Can you embrace that and let it be in you? Let it be in you and let it be your motto. Not self, but for country. And when you have that motto, you'll make an impact in the world. Because the fruits of the Spirit would allow you to go to Africa and give somebody clean water to eradicate a disease. Because of the fruit of the Spirit will make you humble and meekness and give you love, joy, and peace. That's who my friend Jimmy Carter was. I'll finish by saying this. Right there, Andrew, where you sitting, on a Sunday morning, President Carter was sitting in a wheelchair over there. He was not teaching Sunday school. Kim was going to teach. A man in the back from Africa with his family came in. He wanted to meet President Carter. I said, well, he's not teaching today, and I doubt if he take any pictures either. He said, but please, 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 sir, can I meet him? I just want to tell him thank you. I walked over to President Carter where he was sitting there in the wheelchair. I said, listen, sir, I don't mean to bother you. We're getting ready for service. But there's a man from Africa that wants to meet you and say thank you. He said, well, bring him on up. Congressman Bishop, we brought him up, and his family trailed him, and he fell right there on one knee. And before his knee hit the ground, tears was bawling down his face. He looked in President Carter's eyes, and he said, I graduated from the University of Michigan. My family is with me. You saved my life and my family's life by helping eradicate the guinea worm. And I just came back to tell you thank you. President Carter leaned over and put his forehead on this man from Africa's forehead. And they both was bawling and crying. He took his arm and put on his shoulder. And they both was comforting each other and crying. I could only imagine the love that President Carter felt, but it reminded me when Jesus said, wasn't there 10 lepers that I healed? But only one came back to say thank you. But you see, to know JC, it wasn't all about the thank you. It was the fact that he made a difference in one person's life. Not self, but country. Not self, but country. Don't let his legacy die. Don't let this nation die. Let faith and hope be our guardrails. God bless you. Let's do the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, as we forgive our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever. Amen.
Strong to say.
the last time President Carter was here in the Navy was in the choir. It was sailors from all over, and there was thousands of people who were watching online, and there was people who had spent time all out in the parking lot sleeping at night before they got here. And he would finish his Sunday school lesson by saying, "Thank you." Caregivers, could you stand, please? Please stand. Dr. Raines, you and the team and the caregivers extended my friend's life. And he is grateful. And today he would say, thank you from the bottom of his heart. And so we acknowledge you for all that you've done for him every day, making life worth living. Thank you. You may be seated. Maranatha, could you please stand? You've kept his legacy, Kim, by teaching Sunday school. You didn't want that burden, but Uncle Jimmy called you, and then you were called by a book, the Sunday school book and the book of Uncle Jimmy. But you answered the call. Maranatha, George, Jan, all of you guys, you've made life pleasant for him here. Bose, all of you guys that kept this place alive. Keep it going. Where have you been? What have you done? Who have you helped? And how can I help you? I love you. Uncle Jimmy would say, thank you, and I love you, and ain't nothing you can do about it. You can sit down. Just protocol, General in the detail, Curtis, the Carter Center. Could you guys all stand, please? The Carter Center, all those that's been playing, all that's been involved in this. Carter Center, Ruth, Polly, Lauren, Beth. Listen, JC would say thank you for all that you guys have done for him. Curtis, thank you. Brother Wise, thank you. And sometimes they gave me your pound cake. General, thank you for the spirit of excellence for our nation, putting our nation on display in the spirit of excellence for the best. I know he would say thank you. And on behalf of the Carter family, all of them, I want to personally say thank you for your leadership. Carter Center, the baton is being passed to you. Jason, the baton is being passed. We need you. Our nation needs you to do more. Thank you for all that you've done and will continue to do on behalf of this great man. You may be seated. I feel like I'm leaving somebody out. This is my benediction. To the Carter Center family, I love you. Amy, I love you. Jeff, I love you. Chip, I love you. Becky, thank you so much. Jack, I love you. Elizabeth, I love you guys. Josh, Jamie, all of you guys, I love you. Miss Sybil, I love you. Thank you so much. Miss Mary, thank you for all that you've done for the Carters. Please stand. Thank you. Thank you, Mary. You are truly family to this family. All the way from the governor's mansion to the White House to back to Plains. You've been the glue in so many cases. And this family loves you, and we say thank you. You see, at the pearly gate, blacks are all at the gate with the whites and the browns and others. At the pearly gate, everybody's there, Miss Mary. And there's no difference. And we thank you. You've been a blessing to this Carter family. If I forget anybody, hold it to my head and not my heart. My wife's trying to tell me something. Park service, please stand. Thank you. Thank you. You have a big task ahead, and the nation is waiting. The nation is waiting to be able to walk onto that compound and visit Miss Rosalind and Jimmy. The nation is waiting to go by that gate where Jimmy Carter picked some wild roses and planted them so that they can bloom every spring, so that when his bride comes out, he can see wild red roses every day. He told me to do it, Chip, but I don't have that type of talent. I just have to buy roses. Thank you. You got a big task, getting everything ready for him. Finish the race. Finish strong. Continue to mantle. And I love you guys, and ain't nothing you can do about it. That being said, we're going to have music by David Osborne with our receptional. And listen, the church know I'm a crying preacher. I've been crying the last 6 days. But these are tears of joy because JC has an encounter with JC.
It is well with my soul, the song, the backdrop to what has been a beautiful private service for President Jimmy Carter there at his longtime church, Maranatha Baptist Church in Plains. It was a beautiful service led by the Carter's personal pastor, Tony Loudon, who gave beautiful and personal remarks about the life of Jimmy Carter. As his casket is brought now out of the church by the pallbearers, led by the honor guard there. It was a beautiful and much more personal service than what we witnessed at the National Cathedral this morning in Washington. Much more personal, much more intimate, with only family members, caregivers in that moment. When Pastor Loudon asked the caregivers to stand, those have been caring for the late president for the last couple of years, really, and especially since he entered hospice care. Tony Loudon called himself the crying pastor. He did well up a couple of times during that ceremony, referring to Carter on several occasions as JC, you know, demonstrating how close these two men were. Quoting the late president, saying, "Faith and hope should be our guardrails," and telling us that Jimmy Carter would oftentimes call him and ask, "Pastor, who's sick? Who can I call?" You know, just expressing his wish and his desire, even though he couldn't be present in the church, to be involved. Let's listen as they play a Hail to the Chief.
Order! Arms!
Night has fallen in Plains, Georgia, as the Carter family looks on, as the late president is returned to the hearse on its way to a private ceremony where the former commander-in-chief will be buried after the service at Maranatha Baptist Church, a place that meant so much to the Carters, especially after they returned in 1981, after President Carter suffered defeat and lost the presidency. They officially joined Maranatha, and perhaps are best known for not only their involvement in the community, but his Sunday school lessons there, his teachings there. Tens of thousands of people literally have flowed through that church over the years. So an extremely important place, and his wish that his final ceremony be held there.
And all of the music selected throughout has been so meaningful, so personal to the Carters. All of the musical selections were made by Mrs. Rosalind Carter before her passing. You just heard Old Rugged Cross, played by the 282nd Army Band from Fort Jackson, South Carolina. I mean, so much has been weaved throughout the involvement of the military members who have done such a fantastic and precise job in carrying out the wishes of the Carters and how they personally planned all of this to take place. But also inside the church during the service that was held, the organist, the longtime member of Maranatha Baptist Church who personally knew the Carters. We understand many of the songs were selected from the Maranatha hymnal. And so what we've been hearing throughout really does tell the story of the Carters themselves, who they were, their personal faith. We heard a beautiful musical rendition by Joanna Maddox towards the beginning of the ceremony, and she sang, "Let There Be Peace on Earth." There's a beautiful story behind that. She personally met President Carter when she starred in a one-woman play, playing Rachel Clark, who was a woman who was so important to President Carter. He would later talk about growing up that Rachel Clark and her husband, Jack Clark, actually lived on the Carters' property. They worked there and they farmed the land. And actually, as a boy, he would start his day at 4 o'clock in the morning working with them, stacking peanuts, picking cotton, caring for the Carters' farm animals. Working alongside them, he learned many life lessons and actually connected with the faith that would become so integral to his life. And that was something that that Tony Loudon talked about, the pastor, during the service, was that Rachel Clark was someone who taught President Carter the faith that he would come to claim as his own in his later years.
The timing of this processional is notable in the fact that it is dark outside right now. We're expecting the family to walk behind the hearse for some time before the burial, and so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out and the visibility of all this as it continues to unfold, because from this point it would seem we have about another hour of things that need to happen before President Carter is finally buried. Dr. Joe Crespino from Emory University, a historian who is intimately familiar with the Carter presidency. We were talking about the times in which President Carter grew up in Plains, no running water or electricity, taking showers by dumping water on one another. These are completely different times and a completely different era from his boyhood up until today, 100 years later.
Well, President Carter was part of what's often called the greatest generation, you know, a generation that came of age in the Depression and fought in World War II and helped forge the post-war world. And it is remarkable to go to the National Park Service site there of his boyhood home. All of it's preserved, the local store, great exhibits about the house where they, you know, and having to go outside to the outhouse and things like that. But it was a different world. It was a time in which the South was very much a kind of nation within a nation, given the level of poverty for both whites and blacks, still struggling to recover economically from the Civil War some 60 years earlier. So it was a very poor, very isolated place. And again, as we were saying earlier, it's just the idea that a president would come from such a humble place as Plains, Georgia, was a remarkable story.
On that note of humbleness, Professor, interesting during the ceremony that the people who cared for President Carter were asked to stand.
Yeah.
And the family actually broke out into applause as a gesture of thanks. The pastor saying, let's give you a big thank you for everything that you did. Certainly something that Carter would have wanted.
Well, any family who's seen a loved one have to suffer and face death, and they know how important the caregivers are. And you've become so close to the people who care for your loved ones, and because you can't be there all the time to care for them. And so that was really poignant there at the end of that service, to see the people who were really closest to the Carters, the family, the caregivers, the members of Maranatha Baptist who kept that church going for so long, the National Park Service workers. These are all the closest of the close folks to the Carters and to the family and to President Carter himself.
Yeah, it was so beautiful to see each person recognized in their own moment, to get that moment to be recognized for all the work that they did for the Carters and for Jimmy Carter at the end of his life. We're seeing the motorcade start to be on the move here, and what's going to happen next is the family will also make their way back into their vehicles. As the motorcade starts to reform here, it is going to make its way through downtown Plains. It was one of the Carters' wishes that as the sort of culmination of these many days of mourning and of saying goodbye to him, that the Plains community would be given a chance to participate in this, and so they will be making their way through downtown Plains for a final time. We're also going to see the Carter family walk behind the hearse for a portion of that time. Our Christine Spiro has been standing by for us in downtown Plains. Christine, the motorcade will be making its way through there pretty soon now, and a lot of people there are expecting to see the Carter motorcade pass through, and people have been waiting many hours for a chance to say goodbye.
Yeah, they have been, Courtney. When the motorcade first drove through Plains, it was complete silence. Everybody taking in the moment, seeing the hearse carrying the remains of President Carter, flanked with American flags, drive down Highway 280 and turn toward the high school and Maranatha Baptist Church. I'm already starting to see some flashing lights coming down Bond Street here. Well, they will make a right turn here onto Highway 80 and proceed down to the Carter family residence. As you said, Courtney, it is at Plains High School, which I can see from my vantage point, where the family will make the determination from there whether they will get out of the vehicles and walk the rest of the distance to the Carter family residence. Tom talked about the sun being down, of course, and what the visibility would be. The street lights are on all along here, Highway 80, as you see the initial vehicles coming by from the beginning of the motorcade. And I'm going to just quietly actually step away so you can continue to watch this. I'm going to step off camera for just a minute as everybody here is mostly in silence as the motorcade is driving by and members of law enforcement are standing at attention on either side of the street, getting ready to receive. After you see these police vehicles go by, that will be followed by several troopers on motorcycles, and I can hear their engines in the distance making their way here soon, Courtney and Tom.
Yeah, and Christine, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not only nighttime, but temperatures have also dropped precipitously since you joined us last time when you said the sun was shining and warming things up on folks. Doesn't look like any fewer people are standing out there. We're seeing the same amount of well-wishers that we did earlier when you first began your reporting.
Yeah, you're right, Tom. The temperatures have probably fallen about 10 to 15 degrees since the sun has gone down at around 5:30, and just momentarily you will see at least a dozen police on motorcycles going by here. It's quite the sight at nighttime, seeing these bright flashing lights here along the community of Plains. And there are a lot of people here where I am, Tom, because this is where you will first see members of the Carter family if they choose to walk on foot toward the family residence. This is the first area where you'll start to see them, and there are a lot of people around here because of that.
Yeah, you can kind of hear the roar of the motorcycle escort, as you mentioned, at least a dozen in number. That is so emblematic of a presidential motorcade, both presidents who are alive and certainly those who are escorting the casket of the former president, Professor Crespino. I'm keenly aware of the gratitude not only of these people who are lining the streets, but of the late president himself. As he looks down on this scene, it's very, very heartwarming to see these folks out here.
Yeah.
Braving frigid temperatures to be able to say farewell.
Yeah, it's a really poignant moment. I know the planners had intended for this to be an hour and a half earlier, and before the sun had set. But but to have it here in the darkness and to see these people still out there waiting to see President Carter's hearse for one last time, it's very poignant.
It was something I recognized when I went through the Carter Center during the public visitation period. Is just the amount of people, had to be hundreds of people all throughout all of the exhibits and in the room where his body was lying in repose, and just the stillness, the quiet, despite the number of people who were there. It just really moves you to see that level of respect and reverence given. It just really speaks to how much people care and people are taking this moment so seriously.
Yeah, I agree, and I think you talked earlier about people bringing their children to see President Carter lie in repose, and yes, to see a former president, but also to see a remarkable American. Someone of the figures of decency, of peace, of a remarkable accomplishment, and a truly historic figure in the history of the United States.
This favorite son of Georgia, on his way to his final resting place next to his beloved wife. We'll pass through our camera shot at any moment now. We saw the motorcycle brigade that is leading this processional, and a determination by the family as to whether the plan was for them to walk behind the hearse. And obviously, given the conditions that are out there now, it being dark and extremely cold, they're figuring out whether that's going to happen.
We do understand from our Christine Spiro, who's there on the ground, the family is getting out of the vehicles now. The plan was for the motorcade to stop at the high school there, and so we understand from our Christine Spiro that she is seeing members of the family get out of their cars, presumably to walk behind the hearse, which would just be so beautiful, you know, as an image, just to see that. And as we talked about, it kind of brings to mind the walk down Pennsylvania Avenue. I mean, we've seen throughout this entire process just so many parallels and so many homages made to different points in his life, and being able to touch on those different times in his life that stand out throughout history. It's just a beautiful way to come full circle as we say goodbye to him for the final time.
If Jimmy can do it on a cold day in Washington after his inauguration, then by golly, the family's going to get out and walk for a little bit in Plains.
Also in January, I should note.
Yeah,
you know,
that's right.
Inaugurations.
Professor, we were talking earlier about how the Carters really came to define Plains. I mean, they really put it on the map and made it the town that it is today. And whether that legacy and that relevance will perpetuate and continue, and whether Plains will continue as this destination for people who want to learn more about our late president.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the future of Plains remains to be seen, but it will always be a place that will commemorate one of the great Americans of the late 20th and early 21st century. And not only a great American, but a great citizen of the world, a peacemaker, and a man who works tirelessly for his country and for the world. And I think there will always be people and families, parents who want to bring their children there to be inspired by President Carter's life and legacy. And Plains will be a great place to do that.
Yeah, it looks like what we are seeing now is the procession at the far end of the street. And we're seeing some movement there at the very back of the camera shot, the far end there. So it looks like they are starting to make their way down. And you can just see all the people lining the path where they'll come down. Plenty of opportunities for people to see them and wish them well. I have to imagine this is so nice for the family members just to see this outpouring of love and support. You know, at the end of what's been, I'm sure, a very emotional and long day for all of them. This is someone that they personally knew and loved, and so this is a way for them to get some support, some much needed love and support from the Plains community.
Both physically and mentally exhausting and emotionally for the family as they say goodbye to their patriarch, their father, grandfather, great-grandfather, somebody who has meant so much to them and has symbolized so much for our country and put his mark on the world through his work in impoverished nations, his work to promote democracy and free and fair elections, and to eradicate disease in many corners of the world, Professor. And this was an effort not only carried out by the president himself, but Rosalind Carter was there with him, hand in hand, wherever they went. I mean, she was just as involved as he was.
Absolutely, she was with them every step of the way. But the work in public health and eradicating the guinea worm, which was just a horrific plague for millions in Africa, and it's in some ways it's emblematic of President Carter's focus and his intensity, that he decided this was going to be the place that the Carter Center made its mark.
Okay,
and
so here's Pastor Tony Loudon leading the walk down the main street of Plains, and we presume that the family is not too far behind the pastor. Can't imagine this will be a very long walk, but a symbolic one, indeed.
Yeah, a walk that demonstrates maybe the very humility that President Carter stood for throughout his life. And you see the members of the military there flanking the hearse as it makes its way past. Just incredibly quiet and still with all of those people. It's just so striking.
And quite beautiful to see the honor guard flanking the hearse, and there is the Carter family walking shoulder to shoulder.
Even the really little ones, which I think
waving
is so
an
sweet.
American flag.
Yeah.
After all, for them, it's not a moment of sadness as much as it is a moment of celebration, and celebrating this long life lived of our 39th president.
So as the Carter family makes their way through downtown Plains, as the streets are lined with supporters, with people who may have personally known the Carters, they are ultimately making their way towards the Carter residence, where the president will be buried alongside his wife of 77 years, Rosalind Carter. They'll be buried under a willow tree that they selected. It was where they wanted to be buried and spend eternity side by side with one another. They spent so much of their lives together, so only appropriate that they should be buried together in death. And yet another sign of humility. The Carters chose to be buried at their private residence, not in fact at the presidential library, which would have been a perfectly fine choice. Other presidents have chosen, but wanted to be buried in Plains, where they spent so much of their lives and where they were from.
Let's watch this for a moment. Struck by the silence there on the streets as the Carter family passes by. Perhaps we can't hear some thank yous or well wishes being delivered by the crowd on the side of the streets there. A lot of folks wanting to memorialize this, as I think I would if I were standing there with their phones. It's such a significant moment. Sort of a conflicting feeling, Professor, because you want to gesture in some way to the family, but you also want to respect their privacy and this moment for them as well.
Yeah.
I think they'd welcome it, though.
I think so, too. I think probably many of these people who have stayed are folks who know the family well and are there, and it allows them to connect with the family, to see them and to be able to gesture and nod and acknowledge and let the family know that they're there to support them in this time of both, as you say, both of grief, but also of celebration and joy for a life well lived.
President Carter wrote almost 36 books. Correct me if I'm wrong, Professor Crispino, but I'm sure people will now maybe have a renewed interest in some of the things that he wrote about, the things that he talked about. Yeah. As we wrap up what's been over a week of remembrances, of looking back, I'm wondering if there might be a particular writing, maybe it's a Sunday school lesson, a teaching that stands out to you as something that people might want to turn to and maybe read about now.
Well, I'm a professor, so I'm so glad to get that question, to be able to give a reading list. But two things I would point out. One is his wonderful memoir, An Hour Before Daylight, which is an account of his childhood in Plains. And so it would be a great thing to read that before going down to Plains and seeing the National Park Service memorials there, and that would be a great thing. But the other piece of writing that I love of President Carter's is his the Law Day speech that he delivered in 1974 at the University of Georgia. And this is something you can Google, you can search for it online, and it's a remarkable piece of American political oratory. It was a speech that he gave in 1974.
I'd like to thank you, Dr. Joe Crespino of Emory University, Dr. Charles Bullock from the University of Georgia, who joined us earlier today. As a nation memorializes and remembers the 39th President of the United States, the favorite son of Georgia, James Earl Carter Jr., as he makes his way to his final resting place.
One final journey, one last chance to say goodbye. So many memories shared, so many hymns sung, so many Bible verses read, so many things that we shared as a nation and that we at Fox 5 got to bring to you as viewers. But we just hope that these final images are what stick with you as the family, members of the Carter family, get to take their walk and say goodbye.
A journey that has taken him from Atlanta to Washington and finally back to Plains. Thanks so much for joining us for our special coverage tonight. We hope to see you later for Fox 5 News at 10 and 11.